Chapter 809. This north-south river was called the Green Crossing River. The river water was noisy and the surface of the river was 20 zhang wide. According to legend, the ancient Taoist immortals once rode a green reed here to carry people across the river. The young mad monk's straight line to the east allowed the people of Jianghu to figure out the general route. A group of spectators had been waiting here for a long time. At first they were scattered, but later they involuntarily gathered together. They were really afraid of the monk's irresistible force and were afraid of being killed by an innocent person. They felt that if they were in a group, their chances of survival would be higher. Even if they were unlucky enough to step on that straight line, they would all die together and be companions on the road to the netherworld. Therefore, 50 to 60 people gathered together. The fish and the honest people were mixed together. There were Jianghu heroes who had been famous for a long time. There were Jianghu heroes who hid their heads and tails. There were Jianghu heroes who had only just entered the Jianghu. There were nameless pawns who had entered the Jianghu, and there were also young heroines whose beauty made people drool. There were a few pairs of old enemies, but at this moment they did not have the time to draw their swords against each other, but they were all secretly on guard. Several popular heroines either approached the famous heroes with smiling faces to flatter them, or they were politely accosted by many Jianghu men with cold faces. In the present Jianghu, where people who carried bricks and fought street battles dared to call themselves Wulin people, it was like the Yellow River and the mud and sand. It was impossible to expect everyone to be as free and unrestrained as Dong Tai Li Chun Gang. A few years ago, there was a young talent who had a good reputation who threatened to imitate the ancient people and perform a feat similar to crossing the river on a reed. He really succeeded and won countless cheers at that time. It was a pity that within a few days, he was exposed by his Jianghu peers, saying that the reason he was able to step on the water and float across the river was because of an iron chain that hung a few feet below the surface of the river the night before. He had no choice but to retreat from Jianghu dejectedly. And this was where the brilliance of Jianghu lay. You would never be able to guess what kind of magnificent feat a true genius would achieve, and you would never be able to predict what kind of joke the next person would be. The sudden stop of the young monk, who had already made a name for himself, made those onlookers who thought that the useless monk would directly cross the river tremble. They were afraid that he would be like a pedestrian who saw an eyesore and would stretch out his foot to crush the nest of ants. However, what happened next not only relieved the onlookers, but also gave them a great surprise. They saw a stranger in white coming from the opposite bank of the Qingdu River. The stranger's vision was blurred, and it was hard to tell whether the stranger was a man or a woman. The stranger crossed the river, and the young monk just happened to come back to his senses after holding the water and looking at himself in the mirror. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and rushed to the river surface. The two people separated as soon as they touched each other. The mad monk, who had always been invincible, was actually stepped on by the man in white on his bald head. The man in white floated back to the east bank, and every time he stepped on the mud, there was a muffled sound. The mad monk also fell back to the west bank, staggering like a drunkard and shaking his sleeves like an actor. The power of one step made the turbulent river suddenly stagnate. It was not until the two people landed that the river regained its momentum. The young monk, whose kasaya was in tatters, did not hesitate to cross the river for the second time. The man in white also crossed the river to intercept him. This time, the man in white stomped hard on the monk's chest. The whole river under the two people shook. In the eyes of everyone, the man in white, whose face they finally recognized, was handsome and valiant. Of course, he was the immortal who had not appeared in the world. Although he looked young, he must have lived for hundreds of years. The useless monk, who was worthy of being called a devil in a kasaya, was destined to be stronger than the immortal today. This time, the two sides, who were at the apex of the righteous and the evil, retreated to almost the same place as before. Looking from afar, it was impossible for the onlookers to notice the difference. The man in white was expressionless and did not care about the admonition of not doing things more than 3 times. The monk, who had once been Mahavairakana on Mount Lantua, also waved his sleeves and swept across the river. This time the young monk, who was wearing a pair of tattered straw sandals, pushed out his palm and pressed it against the sole of the man in white's shoes. This time, they were in a confrontation. Visible ripples of chi clouds appeared behind the two people. The monk's figure fell, and his straw sandals slid 100 feet on the river's surface and floated straight back to the shore. The man in white's speed of retreating was slightly slower. However, the monk stood on the shore near the water, while the man in white's landing point was more than the previous 2 times. This situation made the onlookers feel anxious. The monk lowered his head and looked at the straw sandals that he had casually woven. The onlookers were in a daze. A battle of life and death between masters was often decided by a hair's breadth. Was this crazy guy who sang the useless song all day in a hurry to be reincarnated? Or did he not regard the man in white as a mortal enemy at all? Was it really as he sang, heaven and earth were not worthy of his attention? Fortunately, the man in white did not disappoint the onlookers. After retreating 3 times, he did not show any signs of fatigue. This time, he did not cross the river in one step, but jumped to the center of the river. With the tip of his foot, he picked up a water column as thick as a bucket. The water sword pierced forward fiercely, and the man in white followed behind it. The nameless monk with tattered straw sandals and a torn kasaya gently raised his head and raised an arm to cover his hand. He used the sleeve to cover his hand to form a secret mudra. The water sword fiercely hit the monk about 3 feet away. It was like an egg hitting a rock, shattering with a loud bang and blooming water splashes all over the sky. The man in white did not retreat, and even used the demon-subduing mudra to break the monk's sleeve mudra. The 2 mudras were in a deadlock. The man in white raised his leg and kicked. The monk smiled and let the leg sweep across his neck. His body flipped in the air, and when he landed, he was already in a sitting position with his fingers bent like a firefly. It was too wonderful for words. The man in white seemed to be really angry. For the first time, he spoke coldly and slapped the monk's bald head with his palm. 5 characters absorbing track. The monk took the palm head on again, still in a sitting position. His body spun and he sat on the surface of the river. The river water rolled down south, but he floated on the water without moving. The man in white retreated to the place where the young monk was sitting. He raised his right hand and a water sword was pulled out from the river water. She who had once fought with Dong Tai in Dunhuang, slashed down on the head of the Akalanatha Wisdom King. The water sword broke. It was unknown whether it was the holy monk of Mount Lantua or the crazy monk of Lu Songtao from the devil cult who sank half of his body into the water. He lay facing the south with his right hand supporting his chin. He became more peaceful and carefree. However, thousands of water droplets were splashing on the surface of the Qingdu River. Perhaps because the spectators were too noisy, Luo Yang, who had killed her way to Beimang Empress and Tuoba in Beimang, waved her hand and splashed the water like arrows. 50 to 60 people would die on the spot without exception. A young Taoist wearing a Wudong Taoist robe ran for a long time and finally caught up with the murderous rain. He stood between the spectators and the splashing water. He drew a circle with his hands and gathered all the water droplets in the big circle between his hands. It turned into a water ball that was almost as tall as a person, and then pushed it into the river water. Luo Yang frowned. The young Taoist did not speak to the man in white. Instead, he said to the crazy monk who was slowly getting up, "If the breeze is useful, turn the book for me. If the Kunlun is useful, I will go down the mountain. If the grass is useful, I will know whether it flourishes or withers. If the meditation is useful, I will seek peace of mind. If the river is useful, I will quench my thirst with a ladle. If the sun and moon are useful, I will follow my heart. If I am here, I will go somewhere." It seemed like he was talking nonsense, but in the end, this Wudong Taoist had given his own opinion on the crazy monk's useless song. Unexpectedly, after the monk stood up, his eyes were no longer turbid. They were as clear as spring water. His hands were behind his back. In the blink of an eye, his appearance had changed more than a dozen years. The young monk had turned into a middle-aged monk. His previous ignorance and bewilderment had been swept away, replaced by a vigorous air that looked disdainfully at the world. At this moment, Lu Songtao was the 9th cult leader of the devil cult at his peak. Standing on the river surface, he cast a glance toward the young Taoist priest. Then he turned his gaze toward the white-robed Luo Yang. With a chuckle he said, "The current Zhonghu is really an eye-opener. I remember at that time in the World Sword Forest, there was a sword Immortal Wei Chao. He recklessly rode his sword to pursue the deer mountain and stabbed my abdomen. I returned the favor by stabbing his sword into his mouth. His body was hung on the top of the mountain. The number of enemies I implicated was really too many. But when I roamed the Zhonghu for the last time, I rarely met an opponent who could be considered as my equal. That kind of Zhonghu was lifeless. But now it is different." Luo Yang only responded with a cold laugh. Lu Songtao lowered his head to look at the Kasaya and fell into deep thought. Shaking his head, Lu Songtao raised his head and said with a laugh, It doesn't matter if you can't figure it out. Since I clearly remember who I am, I can't come here in vain. I don't care who you are. Since you want to stop me, I don't know when I will lose my consciousness. How about we make a bet? Let's bet if I can make it 300 li to the east. If you lose, I will go to Zhulu Mountain. If I lose, you will be the cult leader of the devil cult after Lu Songtao. Luo Yang calmly said, if you hide, don't talk about 300 li, you won't even be able to make it 30 li behind her. A big red fish with a carp's body and dragon's whiskers appeared. Lu Songtao laughed loudly and raised his hand to borrow a sword from the waist of a spectator. He held the sword horizontally across his chest and flicked his finger. The sound didn't come from in front of him but from the ninth heaven. The world only knows that Lu Songtao is a devil who willfully slaughters the innocent. He has always liked to kill people with his bare hands. Only one person knows the difference between Lu Songtao with a sword and without one. It's funny that in that generation of Jianghu, including Wei Chao and Wei Chao, there were at least 5 land immortals. After I came out of seclusion, none of them were worthy of Lu Songtao drawing his sword. Lu Songtao looked at Zhulu Mountain 300 li away, his gaze gentle and intoxicated. You said you wanted to see the elegance of a sword immortal with your own eyes, so here I am. That time, I was late by 6 days. This time, I might be late by a whole 100 years. Chapter 8:10. Occasionally, a huge koi fish would jump out of the water and fall back into the river. The 50 or 60 Jianghu people who survived the disaster did not make a sound for a long time, even if they saw the man in white and the monk in gray leave. They were afraid of the unexpected disaster until the young Taoist turned around and bowed. When they heard that the Taoist called himself Li Yufu of Wudong, it was like thunder in their ears. After Wang Zhongluo and Hong Shixiang, the new chief of Wudong, Wang Zhongluo was recognized as a late bloomer. He gradually entered a good state in the cultivation of Tian Dao until he reached the big yellow court. As for the immortal Hong Shixiang, he rode a crane to Jiangnan, went to Dragon Tiger Mountain with a sword, and drove out of Tai and city. These were all mysterious deeds that even the immortals would envy. As the youngest chief in the history of Wudong Mountain, Li Yufu's future achievements might not be as high as Tian Men. Li Yufu looked elegant and had a high social status. He was easy to get along with people, which was the opposite of the arrogant Taoist of Dragon Tiger Mountain. While he was talking with someone, Li Yufu looked happy and apologized. He turned around and greeted a middle-aged Taoist who had landed on the bank of Green Crossing River. Why are you here, Junior Uncle Wang? Sword maniac Wang Xiaoping looked to the east and said seriously, the killing intent of this crazy monk is too strong. It's like Lu Songtao of the devil cult mentioned by senior brother Song. I want to confirm it. If it's really him, Wang Xianxia is unwilling to leave the city. Deng Ti has already gone out to the sea to visit the immortals. Chao Zhongqing is busy with the restoration of West Chu, Gu Zhentang, Chen Jibao, and the others are loyal officials of the imperial court, so they won't make a move. Li Dongxin has already made a move once, so he probably won't stop him again. Shangyin Academy is 260 miles ahead, so I have to come. Li Yufu said guiltily. Yufu overestimated himself and made martial uncle little Wang worry. Wang Xiaoping, who was also unapproachable on the mountain, smiled for the first time. He walked slowly along the bank of the river and said to the young chief beside him, It's okay. This is the responsibility of Wudong Mountain. Back then, little junior brother said that ordinary martial artists strive to be alone in the world when they cultivate. However, for us Taoists, cultivation is like carrying a burden and climbing a mountain. That's why little junior brother can carry the martial Tao and the heavenly Tao with one shoulder. Sect leader, your foundation is not bad. You are similar to Xiao Shidi's. Your temperament is even more similar to his. It's just that you need to think more about the true meaning of these words. Right now, Mount Wudong is flourishing with incense, almost catching up to the scene of several hundred years ago. Headmaster, the more you can't just raise your head and look at the people in the sky. After all, youngest Shidi's cultivation is indeed profound and unfathomable. But where the cultivation came from is even more important. Li Yufu said warmly, Junior Wang, I will remember your words. The breeze on the river made Wang Xiaoping's simple and unadorned Taoist robes flutter in the wind, making her look even more like a swordsman. The sword maniac stopped in his tracks and said with a smile, If junior apprentice brother listens to my nagging, he will definitely have to flatter him a little. Only then will he have the face to steal winter bamboo shoots from my purple bamboo forest. Otherwise, He will chop bamboo to make a fishing rod. Chief, you should learn more from your junior apprentice uncle's laziness and rashness. Although the heavy burden of Mount Wudong is on your shoulders, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't go against your heart. As martial uncles, we don't have great abilities. We have the will but not the strength. We can only ask junior apprentice brother to bear more with you. In fact, although we don't say it out loud, we have been feeling sorry for all these years. Li Yufu's expression changed slightly. Taoist cultivation originally pursued the concept of knowing the autumn of the world when a leaf fell and the spring of the world when a bud sprouted. Wang Xiaoping went straight to the point and said, "Although I'm not strong enough, I should still use some of my strength to shoulder some of the burden. This is also going with the flow. If that white-robed man can't stop Mad Monk, he will most likely run into that man. Since I promised junior brother, I should also go and stop him. I've been obsessed with the sword all my life, but I've never felt that I could use my sword to my heart's content. Last time outside the divine martial arts city, I had a lot of enlightenment. Previously, when I saw Su Fengnian cultivating his will at the bottom of the lake, I learned a lot from him. This mad monk can help me sharpen my swordsmanship. If I'm not as good as him and die with my sword broken, you don't have to worry about me, master." Li Yufu said in a trembling voice, "Junior apprentice Uncle Wang, can you let me do a divination?" Wang Xiaoping laughed heartily and flew away. Today, Wang Xiaoping will have a narrow escape. Li Yufu sat by the river dejectedly. Even if Li Yufu could see his own life and death indifferently, he could not see others' life and death indifferently. This was a big cage. Drawing a circle on Mount Lantua and the withered sword in the Wu family's sword tomb had the same effect. They were both self-satisfied, but Mount Wudong was never like that. The great hammer of Buddhism was used to break through obsession. However, when obsession broke through obsession, it fell into the inferior category. Taoist cultivators pursued Tao and asked. Li Yufu used to ask himself what would happen after attaining immortality and passing through the gate of heaven. It was said that the world was full of hardships, but the immortals were happy. Li Yufu looked sad and looked at the yellow water of the river. There were many heroes in history, including immortals, Buddhas, and sages. A real man could stand on his own ground, his family, his country, and the world. The wind blew and the river water hit the shore, soaking the young chief of Wudong's Taoist robe and shoes. The crowd of Jianghu spectators in the distance, including the swordsman whose sword was borrowed by the crazy monk Lu Songtao, did not come back to his senses for a long time. He suddenly cried tears of joy and shouted loudly, wishing that the world would know that the strange monk borrowed his sword. Lu Songtao borrowed his sword without any warning, and his status in Jianghu suddenly rose. Several Jianghu seniors and big shots took the initiative to get close to him, and said some polite greetings and warm words. Li Yufu turned a deaf ear to them. A bright red river carp jumped out of the river and jumped into the young Taoist's arms. It really matched the couplet of a small Taoist temple on Mount Wudong. The heavenly design ginseng in the carp's arms was lively, and the man was free from worldly worries and comprehends coolness. Li Yufu held the carp and lowered his head to look at the lively carp in his arms. He was in a daze and suddenly smiled. "I'm Li Yufu. You and I are fated. I hope you won't be greedy and take the bait. If all things can really cultivate, I'll be able to cultivate. You and I should work together to cultivate Tao." Li Yufu held the carp with both hands and gently threw it into the river. "I hope we can meet again after hundreds of years." The computer beside Qingdu River was mysterious. The man and the carp made a promise of hundreds of years. The collision 30 miles away was full of the smell of blood. Chapter 8:11. Luo Yang, who took out a spiritual object from the mausoleum of the Emperor Qin, did not stop him once during the 30 miles journey. Instead, she directly landed 30 miles away from the Qingdu River. She wanted to kill him in one shot, which showed her arrogance as the #1 demon of Bei Mang. Mad Monk swayed and ran all the way. Occasionally, there were a few passers-by who heard the useless song. When they looked up, they were already a few miles away. Luo Yang stood proudly with the long-bearded ichthyosaur circling around her leisurely. When the dragon wall flipped, she was stabbed in the heart by the bastard who thought he had succeeded and fell into the river channel. Little did he know that Luo Yang returned to the mausoleum that had not seen the light of day for 800 years. Previously, Su Fengnian only saw the first floor of the mausoleum and already felt that it was magnificent. Who knew that Luo Yang skillfully opened the mechanism and went down? There were countless talismans on the ground, which were the best work of the ancient necromancers. Even the current Qi cultivator gurus would sigh in admiration when they saw it. The two ichthyosaurs circled around a coffin for nearly 1,000 years. After Luo Yang left the mausoleum of the Emperor Qin under the Yellow River, she secretly went to the Arctic tundra. She just happened to catch the big fish of the North Sea transforming from the Kuan to the Peng. Tuoba waited for dozens of years, but she still ruined half of the good thing. Tuoba once told the Empress in secret that when he took the weapon, it would be the day when hundreds of thousands of soldiers of Tuoba's personal army marched south. As a result, not to mention Tuoba Bodhisattva was enraged. Even the Empress, the Son of Heaven, who originally had high regard for Luo Yang, was enraged. For the spider web in Li Mixie's hand, not to mention 100 catchers and 30 butterflies were dispatched. Other than a section of willow, all the other 6 lifting poles and double cocoons were dispatched in full force. Li Mixie personally arranged all the details of the hunt and kill. Beheading Luo Yang was a must. Unfortunately, back then, Luo Yang had slaughtered his way to northern Mang's capital. That time, he had even slaughtered his way all the way to the border. He had even taken a detour midway to meet Li Mixie, who was protected by layers upon layers of armored cavalry, from afar. Luo Yang's actions, compared to Lu Songtao's roaming of the Jianghu 100 years ago, could be said to be in no way inferior. It was just that the Jianghu far away in Liang did not have the chance to hear about this secret history. Lu Songtao did not carry his sword. The long sword made of ordinary material floated in the air and walked side by side with him. One day, he would become an immortal swordsman of the land. It was said that there was nothing in the world that could not be used as a sword. However, when he really had a sword in his hand, regardless of whether it was a bamboo sword, a wooden sword or an iron sword, they all had a completely different aura. Especially in a fight between people of the same realm, the difference between having a sword in hand and not having a sword in hand was even more incomparable. The sword was a spiritual object. Otherwise, the essence of the Wu family's sword would not be the Rui sword embryo. Even when a skilled swordsmith forged a sword, the Rui sword embryo was only the first layer. The Rui sword embryo was the most important part. It was unknown which senior had joked about the fight between experts. It was like two shrews dressed in silk clothes fighting. Both of them wanted to tear the other's clothes apart, but silk clothes were dense and sturdy. The reason why swordsmen could become a glamorous profession in Jianghu for thousands of years was because they had a pair of scissors in their hands. They could tear the clothes apart with half the effort. If they were barehanded, they would first have to break the dense satin with their fists and loosen the threads. One of the 4 grandmasters of the previous generation, Fu Jianghongjia, was not in the 3 sections. However, he possessed the physique of the great Vajra realm and the comprehension of the celestial state. Furthermore, he wore a talisman armor. It was tantamount to wearing the thickest clothes in the world. The ferocity of Han Diaoxi lay in his ability to peel silk from a cocoon. Not only could he tear a Vajra realm physique with his bare hands, he could also cut off the resonance between a celestial state expert and the world. 4 martial artists outside the 3 sects, there was no doubt that the 4 realms of first pin were ascending in order. The Xian finger was lower than the celestial state, and the difference was far greater than the Vajra finger and the Xian finger. There were many cases of people in the latter 2 realms killing each other. Han Diaoxi was able to use the Xian finger to kill a celestial state expert, which made him comparable to Dong Tai's Xian finger. Unfortunately, after the death of Catman outside the Shenwu city, there was no one to inherit his cultivation method. It became a masterpiece. Regardless of Catman's character, it was regarded as the greatest flaw of the Xian finger in the world. When top experts, especially first pin experts, exchanged blows, there was a sense of cherishing life. Exchanging pointers was far more than fighting to the death. Luo Yang in white was obviously an exception who did not cherish the hard-won realm. Without exception, she fought against Tuoba under the eyes of the Empress of Beimang, fought against Dong Tai outside Dunhuang, fought against the former 4th in the world Hong Jingyan at the chess and sword music school, and fought against Tuoba on the back of the giant fish in the northernmost ice field. Without exception, all of them involved their opponents and forced them to fight to the death. This time was no exception. The 2 of them collided. Luo Yang allowed Lu Songtao's sword to pass through her palm. She slapped Lu Songtao's forehead with her palm. The 2 of them each retreated several zhang. Luo Yang's arm, which she used to block the sword, drooped and dripped blood incessantly. Lu Songtao was bleeding from his 7 orifices. He was not feeling well either. The long sword shattered. The spiritual aura of the dragonfish beside Luo Yang also collapsed. Luo Yang shot a glance at the middle-aged monk who was no longer crazy. She retreated and swept away. She said indifferently, "I'll take another blow from you 100 li away." Lu Songtao smiled and sucked in a breath. The blood flowed back into his orifices like a sword returning to its sheath. He took large strides forward, stepping over the scattered broken swords on the ground. He condensed a complete sword. This time, he held the sword in his hand. There was a city 100 li away. Luo Yang in white stood below the western city wall. The person came and the sword came. A sword aura as thick as a mountain peak. When Luo Yang stood still, she was already outside the eastern city wall. The city was forcibly torn into two halves by the sword aura and Luo Yang. The city wall was split. On this line, dust flew everywhere. A shopkeeper selling rouge and face powder stared with wide eyes at the messy shop that was split into two halves. Another shopkeeper was pretending to be cultured with a good friend in the backyard of a private house. They were boiling wine and enjoying the lake scenery. They saw the lake water churning, the courtyard wall breaking, and the pavilion collapsing with a loud bang. Everyone's mink hats were blown to the ground by the strong wind. They looked at each other in dismay. A young master who was strolling on the street with a servant fell into the ravine that appeared out of nowhere with his horse. The man and the horse howled. The servants thought they saw ghosts in broad daylight. They shrank back, not daring to go into the ravine to save people. Lu Songtao outside the western city wall laughed loudly. He ran forward along the crack in the wall. Destroying a city with one blow is not enough. Let's destroy a country with one blow. Luo Yang stroked the dragonfish's body that appeared out of thin air and smiled slightly. They entered the city again. Get out! She kicked Lu Songtao, who entered the city with her, back to the western city wall. Luo Yang stood still in the center of the city, her white clothes fluttering. Lu Songtao's body was bent like a bow outside the western city wall. He straightened his back and slowly stood still. His eyes were a little cloudy, like a jar of white wine that had been stored in the cellar for many years. When someone shook it hard, the dregs at the bottom of the jar floated up. Lu Songtao shook his head and rushed into the city again. He came to a north-south street that was cut by something in the middle of the city. Near the bottomless ravine, a plain-looking woman sat on the roadside with lingering fear. She looked around and found a small hairpin that fell to the ground from her hair. She was about to bend down to pick it up. She came from a small family, and the hairpin was her favorite item that she had saved up for several months to buy. If she lost it, she would be distressed for a long time. She suddenly saw a hand pick up the hairpin for her. She looked up and saw a man in a monk's robe. His cassock was tattered and he was so poor that he could not afford shoes. She was timid and shy. She blushed and did not know what to do. The monk smiled and handed the hairpin back to her. He whispered, "That year, she put her hairpin in my hairbun and made fun of me for having a small hairpin in my hairbun." The strange monk in the woman's eyes stood up and said blankly, "It's a pity that you are not her and I am not me." Lu Songtao, who was in a trance, exhaled a long breath and lowered his head. There was no sword in his hand. That year, he saw her too late and put her naked body in his arms. He took off his clothes and wrapped her up, then carried her back to Zhulu. Lu Songtao tore off one of his sleeves and shook his wrist. A sword appeared in his hand. He smiled at the woman and said, "Take a look at this sword for her." The woman, who had never experienced such a thrilling scene, was frightened. She nodded blankly and was about to cry. Lu Songtao's face was full of tears. He said with a hoarse voice, "That year, the three of us were free and unfettered in Jianghu. Zhao Huangchao betrayed you but not the country. You betrayed Lu Songtao. Lu Songtao betrayed Zhulu Mountain but not you." Chapter 8:12. Lu Songtao raised his arm and lifted his sword. His two fingers on his other hand gently brushed the sword with a determined gaze. In the city, Luo Yang broke off a strand of dragon whisker from a dragonfish. She twirled her fingers and the dragon whisker wrapped around her arm. It was obvious that even she did not have much confidence in blocking the sword with her bare hands. At this moment, a person appeared at the end of the street where Lu Songtao was standing. He dashed into the city and slowed down when he saw the gray-robed monk. He walked forward slowly and stopped 10 feet away from him. He sneered, "Is it really the devil cult leader Lu Songtao? Why are you getting worse and worse? What kind of hero are you to compete with a woman?" Lu Songtao, who originally did not want to pay attention to the uninvited guest, turned his head. The young master had an indescribable charm. His hands were in his sleeves and he was as handsome as a tree in the wind. Behind him, there was a majestic man escorting him. Lu Songtao smiled. What was going on with the Jianghu today? Why were the talents of the Jianghu sprouting like bamboo shoots after the rain? Although this white-haired young man had used an otherworldly item to cross the threshold of celestial phenomenon and could not be considered genuine, if his foundation was not good enough, how could a small pond contain a flood? The man behind the white-haired young man was not to be underestimated. Together with the Wudong Taoist who spoke at the riverbank, Lu Songtao could not help but sigh. If the Jianghu around 100 years ago chose 10 people to fight to the death, the difference in the outcome would not be too great. However, if 50 people were chosen, the Jianghu he was in back then would not have any chance of winning. Lu Songtao held his sword in his hand and was ready to attack. His sword will was torrential and the sea of qi around him was rolling over and over. He forcefully suppressed it and smiled at the young man. It is not easy to have such skills at such a young age. Lu Songtao will not lower himself to your level today. A true gentleman does not speak when watching a chess game. It is fine if you want to watch the battle, but if you interfere, don't blame me for pointing my sword at you. Young man, let me give you a piece of advice. The otherworldly item hiding in the dark is already on the verge of collapse. Don't let your emotions affect your decisions. Without waiting for him to finish speaking, Lu Songtao's boundless sword intent instantly vanished into thin air. Lu Songtao didn't make any movements, but the sword in his hand had already flowed east like a great river. The earth trembled and the city shook for a long time, causing the commoners in the city to mistakenly think that the underground hidden dragon was causing trouble, causing a violent earthquake. They all fled from their houses to flat ground. 20 zhang away, Luo Yang's heart was pierced by a sword. Lu Songtao had only struck once, but he had aged 10 years in the blink of an eye. 100 years ago, Lu Songtao had never used his sword. Perhaps he was the loneliest old sword immortal in the world of martial arts. 100 years later, his sword strike was so powerful that it could destroy a mountain. Lu Songtao was neither sad nor happy. He only looked at the white-clothed woman who would stand at the top of the Jianghu 100 years later. Then he exclaimed in surprise, "Don't tell me you're someone with a different heart." Luo Yang stood up from the ruins and sneered, "It's my turn." Lu Songtao glanced at the white-haired young man, then turned to look at the demoness who had shaken Beimang twice. He shook his head and sighed. Fellow sufferers sympathize with each other. One has to rely on unorthodox ways to steal cultivation, while the other uses external objects to prolong her life. Both of them have no choice but to tamper with fate. You don't have much lifespan left to begin with. Even if you can stop me, Lu Songtao, for 300 li, in the end, you won't die much later than an old man who has lived for more than 60 years. Why bother? The person who came was naturally Su Fengnian, who was worried about nothing. After he leaped onto the city wall, he stopped and looked into the distance. At first, he had no intention of interfering. He didn't even care about going to Shangyin Academy first. After he received the secret letter from the Blue Falcon, he took a detour to come here, afraid that he would miss this great battle. Even if it wasn't a once-in-a-century battle, after all, the battle between the old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat and Wang Xianji in the Eastern Sea was a battle between two cult masters of the devil cult. No matter how you looked at it, it could be considered a great battle that was hard to come by in decades. However, he didn't expect that the so-called white-clothed man from Zhulu Mountain in the letter was the Luoyang woman who died in the Dragon Wall River Channel in the northern Mang. When he approached the city wall, the connected otherworldly item let Su Fengnian know that Luo Yang had sensed his presence. Su Fengnian didn't want to run away. He was a little scared when he saw Lu Songtao raise his sword. He jumped down the city wall in a hurry and tried to boost his courage. Anyway, he had a half-baked celestial state cultivation with him. If he joined in the fun and spoke some words of conscience to the old leader, he wouldn't be killed on the spot. You, Lu Songtao, are the former leader of the devil cult, busy competing with the whole world. Why do you have to make things difficult for people like us who don't mingle in Jianghu? Besides, I'm used to the bitter days of being despised by everyone in northern Mang. Once things get tense, I'm not that slow either. Chapter 8:13. Luo Yang, who had been moving forward, did not even look at Su Fengnian. His flirtatious glances were wasted on a blind person. If Luo Yang was a woman who could be judged with common sense, she would not be Luo Yang. Even Lu Songtao, who had experienced many hardships, felt somewhat puzzled. This woman clearly did not need to destroy both jade and common stone. She was too lazy to determine the winner and loser. So, did she want to directly fight to the death? Lu Songtao raised his head and laughed loudly. He actually had a joyful feeling as if he had finally met someone who understood him after 100 years. He tore off his remaining sleeve and a second sword appeared in his hand. Perhaps it was because of the existence of the sword Immortal, the devil, and the otherworldly item, but due to the resonance between heaven and man, it caused a strange phenomenon. Some snowflakes seemed to be drifting down sparsely from the sky. Su Fengnian raised his head and looked. It was a gloomy evening when the sky wished for snow. Could he drink a sword without a sword? Lu Songtao seemed to have exchanged 10 years of his life for a sword. However, compared to the first sword, this time even Su Fengnian suspected that the sword would weaken again. The next moment, Su Fengnian did not even have the time to curse. No wonder Lu Songtao's sword was slack. The tip of the sword pointed at Luo Yang at first, but when it was only a few feet away from her hand, it turned around and rushed towards him. Yuan Zuozong moved even earlier than Su Fengnian. He grabbed a wooden stick from the street to make a spear and ran forward in big strides. However, the flying sword was faster than thunder. Several of Su Fengnian's 12 swords were destroyed by Han Diaoxi, but it was not difficult to build a sword formation thunderpool. Before Yuan Zuozong arrived, Lu Songtao's fast invisible sword had already broken the thunderpool that was said to be insurmountable. For a moment, the flying sword was flying randomly. Su Fengnian's state of mind was as calm as water. He raised his hand to shake the Kunlun Mountains. This mountain-destroying sword made Su Fengnian, who had almost perfect defense, slide back continuously. The chaotic sword chi was like countless ice alls, fiercely smashing his face. The flying sword kept hitting the sword that he could not see its real body. Su Fengnian was still retreating. The sword that the sword Immortal exchanged with 10 years of his life made Su Fengnian suffer a lot. Fortunately, Yuan Zuozong held the stick with both hands and simply waved it down. A big pit appeared on the ground in front of Yuan Zuozong. There were sawdust and scraps of clothes. His clothes and sword were destroyed. Su Fengnian stood still and stretched out his finger to wipe off the bloodstain caused by the ruthless sword chi. Lu Songtao, who had made up his mind at the last minute to switch people to kill, was not feeling good either. He exchanged a kick with Luo Yang, but Luo Yang's figure did not retreat at all. Lu Songtao had already fallen more than 10 zhang away, landing heavily on the ground. He rolled several times before slapping the ground with his palm. He swayed and floated up. Luo Yang was like a gangrene attached to the bone. Lu Songtao had just stabilized himself when her arm swept across his abdomen. His body was several feet above the ground. Without waiting for him to fly out horizontally, Luo Yang stomped on his abdomen again. The kite with a broken string was directly 7-8 zhang away. This time, Lu Songtao did not fall. His toes hovered in the air a few times like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water, gently landing on the edge of the gully. One wrong step, one wrong step, one wrong step, one wrong step, one wrong step after another. Luo Yang's palm pushed out during the long sweep. Lu Songtao's expression turned serious. He leaned back, dodging Luo Yang's flying sword, which had fallen into the palm of his hand at some unknown time. Luo Yang's palm turned into an elbow, often knocking Lu Songtao to the ground. With a kick, Lu Songtao directly crashed into a distant wall. When he stood up from the dust, the corner of his mouth was oozing with a ghastly black clot of blood. He smiled freely. With 2 fingers, he cut open his abdomen. Gripping the tip of the sword, he pulled out the treacherous flying sword that had pierced his body from behind. Lu Songtao looked at the white-haired young man with a profound mind. Indeed, I did not waste my sword strike on you. Lu Songtao did not look angry at all. Instead, he looked delighted. He gently tossed the translucent flying sword back to Su Fengnian. It was not easy to nurture a sword embryo. Wei Chao could not be called a sword immortal. Sui Xiegu, who was as young as you, was not vulgar. Unfortunately, I did not know if he was dead or alive. Otherwise you could have learned the sword from him. Most people in the pugilistic world believe that there is no second place in martial arts. They are afraid of being stepped on by others and losing their integrity in their later years. However, the great swordsmen are not afraid of being overtaken by their juniors. They are only afraid that the swordsman's legacy will deteriorate from generation to generation. Kid, What's your name? Su Fengnian asked carefully. Xueqi. Do you like to eat swords? Lu Songtao smiled and nodded. Back then, this kid said that he wanted to challenge all the strongest swordsmen in the world and eat all the best swords in the world. When I went into seclusion to practice my swordplay, it was this defeated opponent who became braver with every setback that guarded my seclusion. Su Fengnian took a deep breath. Old man Sui has a great enmity with me. However, he clearly distinguishes between kindness and hatred. I am indebted to him for his sword strike. Lu Songtao waved his hand. That's between the two of you. It has nothing to do with me. Luo Yang glanced at Su Fengnian. The latter immediately fell silent. Luo Yang flicked her finger lightly and an item flew towards Lu Songtao. The latter caught the item with a complicated expression. He asked softly, "It's you? How is that possible?" Luo Yang was expressionless. Lu Songtao, who had originally planned to fight to the death, sighed and flicked the item back. He had a strange expression. So what if I see him? He won't be that person anymore. Luo Yang's expression was still cold. If there's nothing else, then get lost. Lu Songtao clutched his stomach and laughed. Then, he disappeared in a flash. As he left the city and headed east, this demon who had stirred up a reign of terror 100 years ago muttered to himself, "So there's someone more foolish than me." Luo Yang put on a fake smile and stared at Su Fengnian. "Woman. You really hold a grudge. Why don't you say that I took Lu Songtao's sword strike for you for no reason?" Su Fengnian was thinking about how to escape when Luo Yang opened her mouth and said with a smile, "The Yellow River Strike. This little girl will engrave it in her heart." Su Fengnian's hair stood on end when he heard the words, "little girl." Unexpectedly, the demoness Beimang lowered her head and covered her chest with her hand. She mocked herself. Where did the heart come from? Chapter 8:14. Perhaps because it was close to the Shangyin Academy, the tea houses and taverns in the city all had elegant names. It was said that on the walls of any old inn, there were fragments of poems written by Confucians of different dynasties. The Sharp Snow restaurant was located in a secluded area in the city. When it snowed, few people went out to suffer. Plus, there was an unknown natural disaster or man-made disaster in the city, so the business was naturally bleak. The shopkeeper was depressed, thinking about when he could save enough money to buy the small house he had chosen long ago. This era was peaceful, without the turmoil of the spring and autumn period, so it was not a bad idea to buy more houses. His wife always complained that the dowry he prepared for his daughter was too little and could not support their reputation. Compared with the neighboring Song family, the shopkeeper was too far behind. As the head of the family, although he worked hard all year round to make a living, he could not say much. However, after working hard every day, he could go home and drink a cup of tea made by his daughter, so he did not complain anymore. He hesitated whether he should sell the calligraphy and painting that he had treasured for many years. He bought it from a southern Tang survivor who had wandered to another place at a high price. Now it could be sold at a high price, but he still liked it from the bottom of his heart. The shopkeeper sighed. Now that he was middle-aged, everything seemed to have come to an end. He looked up at the snowy street outside the building and pulled up his sleeves. When he saw the two of them enter the tea house, the shopkeeper hurriedly welcomed them, afraid that he would miss out on this deal that was made out of nothing. He didn't care about his reputation and smiled warmly. In addition to the best tea before the rain, we don't lack good wine. What would you like to drink? When the shopkeeper recognized the faces of the two people, he was somewhat stunned. The handsome young man was still all right. He had a warm smile on his face and looked very warm in the winter. With one look, one could tell that he was from a good family. However, the woman with a frosty face was frightening. The shopkeeper subconsciously shrank his neck. Fortunately, for some reason, the white-haired young man was very understanding. After patting the snow off his shoulder, he said with a gentle smile, "Shopkeeper, I'll have to trouble you to warm up a jar of wine. Make it as strong as you can. If you have a stove, bring it over and put it under the table. We can add some money." The shopkeeper quickly rubbed his hands and said with a smile, "It's free, it's free. It's only right." Su Fengnian and Luo Yang were sitting by the window. Lu Songtao had left the city inexplicably. It seemed that Luo Yang was about to deal with him. But when he and Yuan Zuozong were about to fight to the death, she said she was going to drink. Su Fengnian didn't let Yuan Zuozong follow them. Since she said to drink, Su Fengnian would drink generously. Drinking with a gentleman would most likely lead to death. However, drinking with Luo Yang would most likely lead to a better life. The wine was served on the table and the stove was set up. The two of them drank together. Su Fengnian raised his cup and took a small sip. With a slurp, he leaned lazily against the back of the chair and asked softly, "Bodhisattva Tuoba has been waiting for 30 years for you to spoil the good thing? What's going on?" Luo Yang didn't raise her glass to drink. She remained silent. Su Fengnian asked again, "You went to Zhulu Mountain to become the hierarch? Did you send Lu Linggui and the others to let me become a marquis? Chao Chongqing is willing to be a guest of your devil sect and Zhulu Mountain is willing to contribute to West Chu's revival? But to be honest, I don't think West Chu's revival will be possible. When Su Shao destroyed West Chu, he didn't divide the north and the south because he saw the general trend. He didn't proclaim himself as the emperor because people were disheartened. But once he did, those experienced soldiers would die for the dragon throne under his butt. Su Shao had always been a calculator. He didn't do business at a loss. The current emperor of Liang dynasty's Zhao family is not an incapable ruler. He's diligent and self-disciplined to the point that it makes people's hair stand on end. Even if Chao Chongqing becomes a saint, it won't affect the general situation. Perhaps Li Yang wanted West Chu to revive their country with great fanfare. Burning down an entire granary, compared to burning down a bunch of scattered weeds, it was much easier to do. If my guess is not wrong, West Chu's revival will be successful in the beginning, but in the end it will be difficult for them to escape the imperial court's net. This kind of wicked thing. Yuan Benshi was able to come up with it. The emperor of Zhao family was also able to nod his head. Zhang Julu, who is already unrivaled in the struggle between factions, can devise a perfect strategy. Luo Yang was still resting with her eyes closed. She reached out a finger and lightly tapped the table. There was no rhythm to the tapping. A moment later, Su Fengnian suddenly felt suffocated. Blood gushed out of his throat. He quickly broke the connection with the spirit of the red robe and gradually regained his clarity. Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. It's very similar to the finger xian of Catman Han Shengxian. You're really good at everything. Luo Yang dipped her finger into the teacup filled with wine. Using Xiaozhuan, she wrote the name Luo Yang on the table. Su Fengnian smiled. I know. After the Qin dynasty unified the world, the capital was changed to Luo Yang. Luo Yang raised the corner of her mouth. Her face was full of undisguised sarcasm. She asked, "You really know?" Su Fengnian was rendered speechless by this idiotic question. However, this demoness in front of him had fought with the new number 2 ranked Bodhisattva Tuoba, and the number 3 ranked new sword god Deng Tea. She had even dragged down the number 4 ranked Hong Jingyan. Today, she had even fought with Lu Songtao head-on. In the future, she would most likely have to fight with that old bastard in Martial Emperor City. Could it be that she would only stop after she had beaten up all the top 10 martial artists? How domineering of a mad woman was she? Su Fengnian lamented in his heart. Why did he have to meet her in Beimang? Where did the pure and innocent Huang Baozhuang from the city wall go? Su Fengnian voiced the question that had been puzzling him the most recently. Zhulu Mountain appeared at the end of the Qin dynasty. As the old saying goes, when Qin lost its deer, the world chased after it. Could it be that this Zhulu Mountain, which evolved into a demonic sect in later years, is a remnant of the Qin dynasty, just like the Beimang princess tomb? Luo Yang laughed wantonly. Remnant of the Qin dynasty, this comment really hits the nail on the head. Su Fengnian laughed with no sincerity. Luo Yang was too lazy to pay attention to him. She said, Lu Songtao was not nailed to the Dragon Lake by the Dragon Tiger Mountain using the heavenly power of several generations of ancestors. Instead, he went to Lantua Mountain to shave his hair and become a monk. He hid there for nearly 100 years. He should have let go of the tragedy of the past. Logically speaking, he should have put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha, occupying a place in the Buddhist kingdom of the West. However, for some reason, he was possessed by the devil. Lantua Mountain, which is known for its strict discipline, let him go. Even Li Xiaoxin, the Buddha of the Central Plains, did not try to stop him. This is even more against common sense. Lu Songtao, who is not a monk, or Lantua Mountain's scheme, may achieve the same goal through different means. Su Fengnian asked tentatively, "You are telling me this because you still want to drag me to Zhulu Mountain?" Luo Yang did not admit or deny it. She was speaking in riddles. Su Fengnian was honest with her.
As long as you are not in a hurry to kill me.
Luo Yang took a sip of wine. Her eyes were playful. You can even kill Han Diaoxi, one of the 3 great devils of the spring and autumn period. Do you think you can't kill me? If there is a first time, there will be a second time. With your cold temperament, if you don't kill me on the Yellow River, you will not be able to sleep well. Su Fengnian laughed as he poured the wine. I was lucky that the killer cat did not eat the sword of the great ancestor of the sword sect, Xueqi. I was the one who was killed by Han Diaoxi. Killing a celestial being like you? I have nothing better to do. As long as you don't settle old scores with me, to be honest, I don't mind going to Zhulu Mountain to be a nominal marquis. But let me say this first. I will not meddle in the restoration of West Chu. I admire Chao Chongqing from the bottom of my heart. But one thing is another. I don't even have a good grasp of the land in Beiliang. I don't have the ambition and ability to fight for the world. Luo Yang showed an impatient expression. She spun the porcelain cup with 2 fingers and sneered. Lu Songtao was right about one thing. The wine was still warm, but the atmosphere could not be any colder. Su Fengnian saw that she did not want to say more. He quietly drank a few cups of wine, paid the waiter and left the tea house of sharp snow. Luo Yang did not stop him. She dipped her hand in the wine and wrote 2 words on the table. Qin. Si. Luo Yang said calmly, so it's all 3 of them. He doesn't know anything, and she knows everything. It was not like this originally. This devil did something that no one would have guessed. She put her chin on the table and closed her eyes. She looked like a tired ordinary woman who could not wait for the person she liked for a long time. Chapter 8:15. There is one more chapter. P.S. A new WeChat public platform has been opened. Go to Sina Weibo and scan the QR code or search Fenghua 1985. There are several book giveaways. It was a windy and snowy night. Su Fengnian stood at the door. There were no pedestrians on the street paved with bluestones. He held his hands and breathed in the air. It was full of the smell of alcohol. Seeing Su Fengnian come out of Jianxue tea house safe and sound, Yuan Zuozong, who was already the commander of Beiliang cavalry, was relieved. They looked at each other and smiled. Su Fengnian and Yuan Zuozong sat in the carriage. They had to leave the city before the gate was closed. This time, they hurried to watch the battle without any worries. Great ancestor Gu, Huang Shang, and others had secretly rushed to Beiliang under the arrangement of Chu Lushan. It was said that the quarry mountain was almost uprooted from the ground. There were only some unaffiliated artists left. These people were lucky to occupy the place. As for the departure of Su Zhan, Zhou Qinghu and others, Su Fengnian did not care. But the young man, Li Huai'er, was said to insist on going north with Huang Shang to see the scenery of the frontier fortress. He did not travel far because his parents were dead. Since his parents were not in this world, this young man would not have to worry about his family. Therefore, Su Fengnian did not stop him. In the carriage, Yuan Zuozong wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Su Fengnian didn't regard him as an outsider and told him the general situation. Yuan Zuozong was amazed after hearing it. He didn't expect Lu Songtao's identity to be so shocking. Not only was he the former hierarch of the devil cult, but he was also an eminent monk who should have reached the Buddha realm on Mount Lantua. Lu Songtao vividly proved that the devil Buddha could be created and destroyed with a single thought. However, what surprised Yuan Zuozong more was that White Luo Yang, the first devil of Beimang, came to Liangjiang Lake to be the 10th hierarch of Mount Zhulu. The result was a battle of 90. It was really unpredictable. Su Fengnian lifted the curtain and looked at the tea house in the distance in the wind and snow. He smiled bitterly and said, "Why do you get stabbed in the heart every day? If it were anyone else, how could they sit down and drink with others? They would have long hidden away to recuperate from the pain. Only you are worthy of the name Luo Yang." Su Fengnian repeated the 2 words, Luo Yang, and murmured, when the Qin dynasty was at its peak, that man who was hailed as the greatest emperor of all time ignored all criticism and insisted on changing the name of the capital to Luo Yang. Later generations all said that this was against the natural order, and this was the foreshadowing of the destruction of the Qin dynasty for 3 generations. Afterwards, for a woman whose name was not recorded in the annals of history, he lit 1,800 fire beacons, causing him to be viewed as extremely muddle-headed. No one knew what kind of beauty could make Great Qin's emperor do such a thing. One woman accompanied him to conquer the world, and the other woman buried the world. If I were born 800 years ago, I would really like to ask that Emperor Qin face to face which one he loved more. His new lover and his old lover. Yuan Zhuozong laughed and did not answer. Yuan Baixiong, who was as famous as Lu Xianxia in the spring and autumn period, had never had any woman whom he loved. It seemed that he had never been troubled by love. Outside the window, a falcon flew towards the curtain. Su Fengnian lifted the curtain with a smile and untied the narrow bamboo joint from the falcon's claws, allowing the falcon to fly away. After reading the secret letter, he frowned and said worriedly, "I don't know what happened to Wang Xiaoping. She fought with Lu Songtao and exchanged swords with him. This Taoism's first talisman sword seemed to be badly injured. Fortunately, Lu Songtao did not kill her. Instead, he took Wang Xiaoping and went to the east together. I don't think this is mutual appreciation. Even if it is temporary, Lu Songtao is crazy. Now that Wudong Mountain finally has Wang Xiaoping after the bull rider, she may be killed by Lu Songtao. But how can I stop them?" Yuan Zhuozong shook his head and said, "You can't stop them, and you don't have to. Whether Wang Xiaoping lives or dies, it is up to fate. One is crazy, and the other is a fool. Maybe this is a fated encounter." Senior Li Chungang had Dong Tai to take over his sword. Lu Songtao, who has quietly become a swordsman on land 100 years ago, may also want a newcomer in Jianghu to take over his sword. To be honest, I used to use a saber instead of a sword in military battles. Otherwise, I may be a swordsman now. The reason why the way of the sword can stand tall in Jianghu for thousands of years and stand alone to compete with the sages of the three sects does have its own unique charm. Your Highness, it is a pity that you don't practice swordsmanship. Su Fengnian said with self-mockery, "You can't be distracted when practicing swordsmanship. I don't dare to practice it at all. If I give up halfway, I will be scolded and laughed to death." Yuan Zhuozong didn't speak anymore. He didn't want to get involved in such personal affairs. There were so many outstanding generals in Beiliang. He was afraid that he was the one who didn't know how to form cliques and pursue personal interests. Even Xia of Beiliang didn't dare to compete with Yuan Zhuozong on this point, let alone Zhong Hongwu and Yan Wenluan, who had made great contributions for many years. But the more so, when Yuan Zhuozong took over Zhong Hongwu's cavalry alone, no one dared to make trouble. The trap set by Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang for Zhong Hongwu fell through. Zhong Hongwu, who had taken off his armor and returned to his farm, was unusually well behaved. Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He could only sigh that Yuan Zhuozong was too domineering. Chu Lushan was the governor-general of Beiliang, who was only under the governor and administrator of Beiliang. It was said that many people were ready to make trouble in private. This was probably an unintentional willow growing in shade. Chen Shiliang, who was vaguely the chief aide after Li Yishan in Mount Qingliang, had several social engagements with Chu Lushan recently. However, Su Beiji, who was born in a rich family, was the opposite and had a good relationship with many poor people. A domestic carp and a wild carp. Were they secretly competing to see who could jump the dragon gate first? Su Fengnian touched his forehead. Even an upright official couldn't solve a family dispute. It was a headache. When Yuan Zhuozong raised his hand, he caught a glimpse of a few red ropes which were like vivid red snakes lingering around His Highness's arm. Yuan Zhuozong smiled knowingly. The falling snow was like cotton. Outside the curtain, the teenager was humming a useless song which had been spread all over the country. It was just that he was out of tune. Chapter 8:16. Xianxia Academy was a beautiful place, but many people did not know that the academy that had lasted for thousands of years was actually a private school. The rulers who had controlled the Xianxia Academy for generations, whether they were wise or foolish rulers, had never tried to interfere with the Xianxia Academy. Perhaps they had made some small moves, but in the end, they were all unsuccessful. Xianxia Academy had always been outside of the imperial court. It was known as the academy that as long as there was a floor, a book and a person, there would be an endless stream of literature in the Central Plains. Even the Liang dynasty, the only one who had unified the Central Plains after the Great Qin dynasty, treated the Xianxia Academy with respect. Although it was just a formality, it did not hinder the support of the Imperial College and the Yao family school behind the scenes to compete with the Xianxia Academy, hoping to create a tripartite scholarly landscape. However, on the surface, they still gave the Xianxia Academy a lot of special favors. For example, the Prince Zhao Kai, who had unfortunately died suddenly, had once been an apprentice in the academy.
The Grand Chancellor of the Academy was also half an imperial preceptor.
Now, even if the imperial court had opened the imperial examination to select scholars, and the imperial college had diverted many scholars away from the Xianxia Academy, Xianxia Academy still deserved to be the leader of the literary world. In the past 2 years, there was a new female chancellor in the academy who lectured on music.
The students all liked to respectfully address her as Mr. Fish and flocked to her like a flock of ducks. There were as many as a few hundred chancellors in the academy, but half of them were working behind closed doors and delving into private studies.
Only about 160 of them were worthy of the title Mr. Jishang, opening up a forum to give lectures, each specialized in a particular field. During this period of time, there were many Mr. Jishang lectures that were completely deserted. They were secretly ridiculed by the students of Jishang for being no more than 2 or 3 cats and dogs, playing the lute to a cow. She was good at music, and she taught in simple terms. She was not a 2-legged bookshelf fishing for fame. It was rumored that her father was a pillar of the Xianxia Academy, and her mother was a female sword attendant who was highly praised by the late emperor of West Chu. After the destruction of West Chu, it was reasonable for a woman with a desolate background to seek shelter in the academy. In addition, she was so beautiful and talented. Naturally, people admired her knowledge, adored her appearance, and pitied her family background. In the past 2 years, many students had been thinking about her day and night and were intoxicated with her. A gentle and graceful snowfall came unexpectedly. The snowflakes were not big, and they were timid and gentle. Compared to the majestic snow in early winter, it was much more pleasant. Today, Teacher Yu said that she wanted to admire the snow, so classes were suspended for the day. This greatly disappointed the students who had come because of her reputation. The academy was built along the mountain, and there were 3 independent lakes that were not connected to each other. The Lotus Lake adjacent to Teacher Su Weisheng's small building had always been a forbidden area. After the building was empty, no one cared about it. Many small boats were tied to the shore of the fearless lake for the scholars to paddle across the lake. On the small boats, there was a stove for cooking wine and admiring the snow. It was a delightful thing, but with so many small boats, it was like the end of a chessboard. There were many chess pieces densely packed, and the beautiful thing was not as wonderful as expected. The other small and exquisite Buddha's Palm Lake was cold and cheerless. This was because the lake was privately owned. Even the rich students had the money to buy a pig's head, but they did not have the ability to enter the temple to burn incense. They could only look at the lake from afar and sigh. Within 100 feet of the shore of the Buddha's Palm Lake, unrelated people were not allowed to enter. At this moment, in the lakeside pavilion sat a beautiful woman holding a white cat. Her appearance was charming and enchanting, but her temperament was cold and distant, which made people want to conquer her even more. The woman was wrapped in a white fox fur coat that was worth thousands of gold pieces. The slightly bloated white cat was lazily nestled in the fox fur coat on her chest, yawning. It was very lovable. Inside and outside the pavilion, there were 7 or 8 young children playing around. They were all children of the Jishang teachers who had settled down and taught in the academy for many years. The owner of the Buddha's Palm Lake was lenient towards these naive children and never refused them to play by the lake. There were many speculations about this mysterious owner of the Buddha's Palm Lake. Some said that it was bought by the Southern Tang imperial family with a large sum of money. Some said that it was the ancestral property of the Grand Preceptor of West Chu, Sun Shiji, and some even said that it was the private property of the descendants of the Great Qin dynasty. There were many different opinions. As for why the Buddha's Palm Lake was named so strangely, there were also many interesting theories. The woman in the white fox fur coat who was holding the cat looked cold and suddenly smiled sweetly. She saw a little girl with goat horns who seemed to have been hit in the face by a boy who had a strong hand during a snowball fight. In a fit of anger, she rushed forward and kicked the boy who was laughing complacently. The boy, who had grown up with her childhood sweetheart, was directly thrown to the ground. The girl with goat horns was still angry. Seeing him struggling to get up, she slapped him to the ground again. The boy was stunned for a moment, then sat on the ground and cried loudly. The girl stood with her hands on her hips and looked around aggressively. She had the aura of a heroine who was invincible and lonely. The woman in the pavilion looked blurred and smiled softly. So lonely. Outside the pavilion, there was a comfortable voice that could naturally make women feel warm and comfortable. Mr. Fish can also feel lonely? The woman rubbed the white cat's head and frowned. When she turned her head, her smile had already disappeared. She saw a handsome face that was not unfamiliar to her. Xianxia was a young man whose name was given by his father. He was from the Old West Chu. His grandfather, Qi Duhai, was the favorite student of the national preceptor of West Chu, Sun Shiji. Xianxia's father almost wiped out Yuan Zuozong's entire army in the Battle of the Princess Tomb. Unfortunately, that battle was suspected to be an unfair victory. In the whole chess game, he still dragged down the general trend of West Chu.
Later in the Battle of the West Wall, this general died in battle.
When his horse died, he dismounted from his horse and fought with it. He was stabbed dozens of times by Bailiang. In the Xianxia Academy, the orphans of West Chu were always superior. Xianxia had such a prominent and tragic family background, and he lived up to his family's teachings. When he was young, he was praised by Sun Shiji as a child prodigy. Everyone in the Xianxia Academy knew that he was determined to win Mr. Fish, who was also from West Chu. Most people were happy to see it happen. The woman in the fox fur coat smiled politely and did not say anything. Xianxia smiled and walked into the pavilion. He did not sit down but leaned against the pavilion pillar with a smile. He did not look at indecent things.
He did not stop at the woman but looked up at the lake. In the eyes of ordinary girls, he was very unrestrained.
There was an ancient tablet erected beside the Buddha's palm lake. It was the Xiaozhuan of the Great Qin dynasty. A white-haired young man who had sneaked into the Xianxia Academy squatted in front of the tablet. He reached out to wipe away the snow, revealing 10 mottled words. Buddha's palm, the 5 fingers are the 5 sacred mountains. Most of the children were lively. They could not stay still and immediately noticed this stranger. The heroine with the goat horn who had kicked and punched the boy ran over, followed by a few playmates who were waving flags and cheering for her. The white-haired young man in white just happened to stand up and stretch. They looked at each other and stared at each other. The little girl looked vigilant and asked fiercely, "Who are you? What right do you have to come to the Buddha's palm lake?" At the pavilion, Xianxia also saw this scene and shook his head helplessly. He felt that the slender stranger was really a rascal. He did not know what he said, but the little girl in front of him was so angry that she punched and kicked him. The man bent down and reached out to touch the head of the goat horn girl. Such a childish young man, even if his hair turned white, what could he do?
In the end, the bastard's loud shouts made the cultured and elegant Xianxia so angry that smoke almost came out of his 7 orifices.
Yu Wei, how did our child grow so big in the blink of an eye? This child asked me who I was and I said that I was her father. Then she hit me. How did you teach your child? Chapter 8:17. If Xianxia was the kind of person who would destroy his manners in a fit of anger, then he wouldn't be able to enjoy such a high reputation in Xianxia Academy. The descendants of the Qi family were generals in West Chu, charging into enemy lines without fear of death. As civil officials, they were able to do as they pleased, and in the blink of an eye, they had become good-natured gentlemen. This was probably the secret of how the Qi family was able to prosper in West Chu. Xianxia's face was like jade, and there was a long sword hanging at his waist. It was normal for scholars to carry swords in the academy. There were even some comical students who carried large axes, even though they clearly didn't have the strength to truss up a chicken. Xianxia Academy had always been lax about this. As long as they didn't use weapons to hurt people, they wouldn't stop them even if they carried all kinds of weapons in one go. But generally speaking, Wuxia scholars still carried swords. Xianxia watched as the man slowly walked over. Along the way, the goat-horned girl held a grudge and kept throwing snowballs at him. This guy wasn't angry at all, and allowed the snowballs to shatter on his body. As he approached the pavilion, he reached out his hand to pat the snow off his body, shook his head, and scraped his boots against the edge of the steps, as if he was afraid that people wouldn't know that he was an ignorant and incompetent scoundrel. The goat-horned girl was still nagging. The snow outside the pavilion was getting thicker, and she used all her strength to roll out a large snowball that she could hold with both hands. She wanted to give this detestable scoundrel a fatal blow, but because she ran too fast, the snowball was too heavy, and the steps were slippery. She staggered and was about to fall on the steps. The white-haired young man, whose back was facing the girl, nimbly stretched out his leg and tiptoed on her forehead, stopping her from falling forward. The little girl felt embarrassed in front of her playmate, so she grabbed this guy's leg and bit down hard. He jumped and turned around, bent down, and twisted her ear. The two of them were in a deadlock, competing in endurance. The two of them were using their eyes to bargain whether he should let go first or she should let go first. After all, the goat-horned girl was a little girl who couldn't bear pain. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she surrendered first. However, she was still pinched by this scoundrel who was only old but not virtuous. The little girl was heartbroken. She cried as if her innocence had been sullied by a flower thief. The naturally charming woman in fox fur put down the white cat and stood up to hug her, and only then did she feel a little better. Xianxia sighed in his heart. It was too ridiculous that he was jealous of this country bumpkin. However, he was still a little angry at this person's rude words. Xianxia to ask calmly, "What are real man's words?" Unexpectedly, that bastard opened his mouth with a smile and hurled insults at him. "I can beat up 500 elegant gentlemen like you with one hand. Don't you think I'm a man?" Although the goat-horned lass in Yu Youwei's arms treated this guy as her greatest enemy today, she didn't have a good impression of Xianxia, who looked like a dog. Xuang was the father and mother of Sir Ji Shang, so she often criticized him in private. She couldn't stand him blindly worshipping the ancients and pretending to be noble and virtuous. Under this influence, the little girl thought of Xianxia as a sissy. When she heard that the stranger made Xianxia suffer, she immediately laughed out loud and secretly gave him a thumbs up. It went without saying that they were enemies, but if you really dared to teach this Qi guy a lesson, this heroine would definitely clap her hands and cheer for you. Xianxia smiled freely. When an ordinary man gets angry, it'll only cause blood to splatter on the spot. This kind of quick revenge is of no help to the affairs of the country or the world. That person still used the vulgar words of a scoundrel. "We're the only 2 men in the pavilion. This old man can break your 3 legs with one slap. How can you talk about strategizing thousands of li away?" The goat-horned lass looked up and asked softly, "Big sister I've heard of a 3-legged toad. How come there's a 3-legged man?" Yu Youwei rubbed her little head and shook her head without saying anything. Xianxia's finger secretly stroked the hilt of his sword. He smiled warmly and said, "This young master can really beat 500 Xianxias with one hand?" That person's expression turned serious. He asked in a low voice, "You're Xianxia?" Xianxia, who didn't look at Yu Youwei, smirked. He finally showed the innate arrogance of a prince of a wealthy clan. In front of outsiders, he had to maintain the demeanor of a gentleman taught by a saint. In front of this idiot, he might continue to provoke him if he only showed respect and humility. Xianxia had always been good at finding the right remedy for a problem. He knew that this kind of half-baked scion with shaky foundations would be arrogant just because they had a little money and power. They only knew how to bully the weak and fear the strong. They wouldn't remember if they didn't suffer the pain. Xianxia was able to be like a fish in water in Shangyin Academy, and become friends with many Ji Shang teachers despite the difference in age. Other than his own talent and knowledge, the Qi family was still thriving even after the collapse of West Chu. The foundation of aristocratic clans was that they wouldn't fall in the face of the wind. Regardless of the rise and fall of the dynasty, they would still do their own research. The emperors and kings would still have to treat the wise with respect. Most of the top 10 wealthy clans of the spring and autumn period had withered because they were too tall and attracted too much wind. Su Xiao, that crippled butcher, was too ruthless. The Qi family, which was just a step or 2 away from becoming a top wealthy clan, had a much more unique advantage. They couldn't become a bird out of the forest, but they also wouldn't be ignored by the new dynasty. Xianxia knew his own limitations. You can ignore me and say that I'm pretentious because I'm jealous, but you can't ignore the Qi family behind me. He didn't expect that the guy would immediately break his facade as soon as he spoke seriously. "You're called Xianxia? This is the first time I've heard of you. The name is pretty good, but you're not." The goat-horned girl originally thought that it was another person who wanted to curry favor with the rich and powerful. She was very disappointed, but when she heard this, she couldn't help but hold her stomach and laugh. She wanted to see the world in chaos. Her petite body rolled around happily in Yu Youwei's arms. Chapter 818. Even a clay bodhisattva would have some temper. Xianxia had been humiliated time and time again in front of the woman he liked. The scholar cooked and swept the floor in a refined manner. He flicked the sword with his finger and sneered, "It doesn't matter if you've heard of Xianxia or not. The sword at his waist is called Exquisite, and it comes from the Dongyue sword pool." For the first time, the man stopped being cynical and laughed softly. "I've heard of Li Chuangong's wooden bull, Huang Lu of Huangjintu, Su of Gojozian of the Wu family sword tomb, and Lu Baijia's Ba Xiao. Exquisite? I've seen and touched a lot of women with exquisite figures." Xianxia was so angry that he laughed. He didn't want to argue with him and directly used exquisite to teach this arrogant guy a lesson.
At this moment, the woman in fox fur who was called Mr. Yu by the scholar sighed and said, "Stop fooling around."
When Xianxia was confused, Yu Wei, who had always been indifferent to him, said softly, "Master Qi, I advise you not to use your sword. Otherwise, you'll embarrass yourself." This time, it was the condescending Xianxia's turn to be on guard. With his family background, observing people was just a beginner's skill. He had already practiced it to the point of perfection. Although Mr. Yu knew that Xianxia's swordsmanship was undoubtedly the best among the younger generation of Xianxia Academy, she still used the words, "embarrass yourself." It was like a hammer hitting a bell, making Xianxia dizzy. Most of his competitive spirit dissipated. The most important thing now was to find a way out of the pavilion. A way out of the world was 100 times harder to find than a real pavilion.
Fortunately, the white-haired young man smiled and said, "You and your sword are not good, but you have good taste.
However, I advise you to stay away from Yu Wei in the future. I won't argue with the Qi family." After saying this person brushed past them. With 2 fingers, he picked up the Wu Mainyang that was even more famous than the Linglong sword in Xianxia Academy, and mischievously threw it out of the pavilion. The white cat rolled on the white snow. This scene stunned everyone who saw it. However, Yu Wei, who was extremely fond of her beloved white cat, only glared resentfully and did not reprimand him.
Xianxia had no choice but to find a way out for himself.
He said indifferently, "Since young master doesn't even care about the Qi family, then I'll wait and see." The goat-horned girl stared blankly at this unruly lecher.
Then, she sat down beside Sister Fish and smiled at her.
"This heroine with fierce fists and peerless legs. Please allow me to speak with your sister. Is that all right?" The little girl tilted her head and thought for a moment. Then, she left Yu Wei's warm embrace and waved her small hand vigorously. Like a general commanding his troops, she skipped away from the pavilion. Permission granted. After leaving the pavilion, a bunch of small heads huddled together and whispered. Even the child who was kicked by the little heroine did not hold a grudge. He ran over and squatted together. Seeing that she was angry, he pretended to be stupid and laughed. The goat-horned girl snorted coldly with a fierce look.
She turned her head and the corner of her mouth curled up into a slight smile.
A little girl who saw Xianxia as someone who would marry no one else but him when she grew up timidly spoke up for him. "Who is that guy? How can he be so rude? Young Master Qi must be unwilling to lower himself to his level.
Otherwise, with young Master Qi's swordsmanship, he would have fallen into the Buddha's palm lake in one strike."
The goat-horned girl rolled her eyes and lectured her. "Didn't you hear Sister Fish say that Xianxia was asking for humiliation? You little love-struck fool. I told you that Xianxia was an embroidered pillow. Why do you like him? His poems are just playthings promoted by his scoundrel friends. Even Master Su by the Lotus Lake commented that they were worthless." The little girl was angry, but she did not dare to refute.
The goat-horned girl, who seemed to be very experienced in the ways of the world, clicked her tongue and said, "Although that white-haired man has a great enmity with me and will be beaten up by me sooner or later, I'm still very convinced right now."
He said that he wouldn't be calculative with the Qi family, but not with Xianxia.
"Listen, how manly."
A silly little chubby boy was puzzled. "Aren't they all the same? Your father is too knowledgeable. How did he give birth to such a greedy goose like you who only knows how to steal food all day long?" The old and experienced goat-horned girl punched him. The little chubby boy sat down in the snow. His eyes were moist. He wanted to cry but did not dare to. After a long while, the little chubby boy said in a sobbing voice, "I also wrote a poem this year." In the ancient Xianxia Academy, if these children of great scholars and writers could not write a few poems before the age of 10, they would be laughed at. The goat-horned girl curled her lips and said, "You don't know shit. How can that be called a poem?" The little chubby boy wiped his tears and ran home to complain to his parents. The goat-horned girl sneered. Look, he's the same as that Xianxia. He can't win in a quarrel or a fight, so he likes to ask his elders for help." The other children looked at each other, speechless. In the pavilion, Yu Wei looked at him and did not say anything. They met again after parting at the Spring God Lake. Su Fengnian took out a piece of paper from his sleeve. His first sentence was extremely unpleasant. He handed it to Master Yu, who was a teacher at the Xianxia Academy. There's an old scholar called Lu Wenbao in the Shangyin Academy. He gave me some names. See if there are any familiar names. I don't really trust Lu Wenbao's comments. If there are any, tell me. If they are close to the truth, then I'll use peaceful means before resorting to force. Regardless of whether they are a 1,000-mile horse or a 100-mile donkey, I'll send them to Bailiang first. However, since Lu Wenbao has appointed them as generals, I reckon that they are all people with some knowledge. They would be happy to go to Bailiang and get an official position. As for the Grand Chancellor, go and tell him. If he can't bring himself to do it, it's okay. I'll go look for him myself later. Yu Yuwei asked calmly, "Are you done?" Su Fengnian nodded. She turned her head and said coldly, "Then His Royal Highness can leave." Su Fengnian was silent for the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. He said, "Okay," and walked out of the pavilion gently. The snow on his shoulders was white, but his hair was white. Chapter 8:19. There was a forest of merits and virtues in Shangyin Academy. Only Mr. Ji Shang could enter. Su Fengnian had studied the geography of the academy and was familiar with it. He thought that he would be stopped along the way, but when he entered the forest of monuments, it was lonely and only snow remained. His footsteps left a series of small pits in the snow, which were then covered by continuous snowflakes. Previously, he went to the small building by Lotus Lake where second sister stayed to study. He sat for a while and no one came to criticize him. Su Fengnian walked into the forest of monuments that recorded the merits of the ancestors. The monuments were of different sizes and most of the inscriptions were epitaphs. However, the graves were often not behind the monuments. The forest of monuments was like a different kind of history, quietly erected page by page in the back mountain of Shangyin Academy. Su Fengnian squatted down in front of an exceptionally small stone tablet and used his sleeve to wipe away the accumulated snow. The epitaph on the tablet had the charm of the great Qin dynasty. Su Fengnian looked up at the falling snow and picked a relatively majestic stone tablet to lean against. After an unknown amount of time, he opened his eyes and saw a petite figure in a straw raincoat staggering over. She held a bamboo basket covered in cotton in her arms and walked with great difficulty. When she passed by Su Fengnian, she was about to squat down when she seemed to have seen a pair of black eyes hanging in the air. She was so frightened that she fell on her butt. Su Fengnian stood up and shook off the accumulated snow on his body. With an apologetic expression, he reached out to pull the goat-horned girl up. He thought that the girl would walk straight over, but he didn't expect her to stop in front of the stone tablet, causing her to suffer a false alarm. The goat-horned girl patted her chest and glared at the mysterious white-haired enemy. After Su Fengnian asked, he found out that the girl's surname was Ouyang, and her ancestral home was Takaraka. The inscription on the tablet behind her was an elegy written by her father. Every time Su Weisheng read it, he would cry. Su Fengnian originally thought that the words were extraordinary, but after reading it, he realized that it was like a letter from home. It was trivial and trivial. Su Fengnian stood up and shook off the snow on his body. With an apologetic expression, he reached out to pull the goat-horned girl up. He thought that the girl would walk straight over, but he didn't expect her to stop in front of the stone tablet, causing her to suffer a false alarm. The goat-horned girl patted her chest and glared at her white-haired enemy who appeared and disappeared like a ghost. After Su Fengnian asked, he found out that the girl's surname was Ouyang, and her ancestral home was Takaraka. The inscription on the tablet behind her was an elegy written by her father. Every time Su Weisheng read it, he would cry. Su Fengnian thought that the words were extraordinary, but after reading it, he realized that it was like a letter from home. Now that he was 20 years old, he encountered an unforeseen event. Now that he was helping the little girl wipe away the snow, he turned back to read the elegy. He actually pursed his lips, not daring to let the little girl see his face. She was still in her innocent years. When her ancestors passed away, she was not yet born, so naturally she did not feel too much pain. Growing up in the school, she was carefree. After she put down the basket, she started to mutter to herself. Su Fengnian then realized that today was her grandfather's death anniversary. This place was indeed a tomb. However, her parents had left for a long journey and had asked her to visit the tomb today. Unfortunately, an unexpected snowfall caused the little girl to suffer greatly. Along the way, she had cursed God countless times. It was not easy for the little girl to find someone who could talk. She spoke softly to the tombstone. "Mr. Su, whom I admire the most,
once said that my father's elegy was written from the bottom of his heart.
Not a single word was deliberately added to the tomb. It was the best elegy. I don't really understand these things. I only feel that my father's elegy was simple and tranquil, just like when he was teaching. He could not speak of great principles. After so many years in the school, he did not teach many good students.
If it were not for Master Su's good words for him, the family would not have been able to eat for a few years.
The box that my mother used to store her dowry was getting emptier. When I was young, I could still secretly wear a lot of jade hairpins in my hair when my parents were not around. Now I can't. Su Fengnian laughed softly. You are still a child now.
The goat-horned girl with the surname Oing rolled her eyes. Sometimes you have a poisonous mouth, as if you have eaten a green snake, centipede, or scorpion. You can make our first young master of the Qi family so angry, but you are also not good with words.
How can you talk to a girl like that?
I think you must have not gained anything from Sister Yu, right?
The squatting Su Fengnian put his hands in his sleeves and crossed them in front of his chest. He smiled and said, I ate a green snake, centipede, and you ate a crow?
The little girl was smart. She raised her fist and pretended to be fierce. You are the one who has a crow's mouth.
Su Fengnian smiled and squinted his eyes. At this moment, his eyes seemed to be narrow and intelligent. His handsome face was filled with warmth. It was hard to imagine that this was the #1 playboy in Bailiang who was feminine and full of ruthlessness. The best way to train one's eyesight was to train one's Taoism skills. When other people were racking their brains to jump into the vat of officialdom, Su Fengnian had already seen all kinds of strange and variegated shows in the vat. Although the goat-horned girl beside him acted like a heroine, like the king of children, her clothes were thin. At this moment, the overly loose straw raincoat she was wearing was even more tattered. Her family background was obviously not as good as her peers by the Buddha's Palm Lake.
In another 5 or 6 years, the children would know the power of the soft knives in the world.
Perhaps they would be bullied by their childhood playmates instead.
Although the Xianxia Academy had been a holy land for learning since ancient times, there were bound to be disputes when there were hundreds of schools of thought contending.
For example, during the chaos of the spring and autumn period, the military school was at its peak. Even those who were just there to make up the numbers were snatched away by the spring and autumn period countries as heroes who could turn the tide.
However, at that time there was a wave of blind looting, and the countries really did pick up the scraps a few times. Now that the world was settled, the scene of scholars saving the country was no longer as grand as it used to be.
Most of the scholars of Jishang and Jixia were dormant. It was inevitable that they would be entangled in daily necessities and seek personal gain. Lu Wenbao had recommended more than 10 people, but they were weak. Most of them were like this. They were depressed and did not achieve their goals. The goat-horned girl lifted the basket and asked, Are you coming with me?
Su Fengnian shook his head. I'm about to leave the academy.
She frowned her delicate eyebrows that already had a pair of embryonic willow leaves. She lowered her head and looked at the bamboo basket. Poor children had to take care of the household early. The food in the basket should not be wasted. However, she had a small appetite. Although it was not easy to get sick in winter, after all, the food was warm and would spoil the taste.
Of course, the main reason was that she felt that it was really boring to walk back 1 or 2 miles by herself. It was better to have someone to talk to on the way back than to be alone in the cold.
Su Fengnian smiled. If you don't mind me freeloading, I'll go with you.
The goat-horned girl gracefully snapped her fingers and said the same witty catchphrase, approved.
Chapter 8:20.
Returning home in the wind and snow, the goat-horned girl was wearing a pair of fine brocade boots. However, as she had not changed them for many years, the satin fabric was so worn that it could not withstand the wind and rain.
Walking from her home to the Dowd forest, she was nearly soaked in them.
The young lady was vexed that she had been in a hurry to cook and had forgotten to change her shoes when she left the house.
She was both distressed and remorseful. However, thinking that the new year was approaching and that her mother had promised to buy her a new pair of shoes in the first month of the lunar year, she was somewhat expectant. Su Fengnian took the bamboo basket and had her walk behind him. Having unexpectedly found a living person in the forest of steels, the little girl was in high spirits. She didn't have the taboo of speaking too much with a shallow acquaintance. Apart from introducing herself, she also talked about some old stories.
She said that her grandfather was a great literary hero of the old northern Han, who was untainted by the wind and had written splendid essays. However, on the eve of the country's destruction, He spoke a few words of fairness to a great general surnamed Su in the imperial court. As a result, he was removed from his position and almost had his head chopped off. When he arrived at the education palace, he lectured on the righteousness and benefit of the state and was also ostracized. The young lady was not afraid of exposing her shortcomings. Su Fengnian followed her to the small courtyard that she shared with several scholars of the Ji Shang dynasty. Most of the other chancellors of the academy also had a festive atmosphere in their windows. Only her house had a rack of grapes in front of it. After entering winter, there was no greenery, only vines, making it appear even more dismal. The young lady, on the other hand, was content and cheerful. Perhaps she had taken after her parents' temperament. As she walked past the rack of grapes, she raised her head and said with a smile, "You came at the wrong time. Summer is the best. Pick 2 or 3 bunches and place them in the Buddha's palm lake for 2 hours. They are so delicious that even the immortal peaches in heaven cannot compare to them. It's just that they attract mosquitoes at night." The goat-horned girl changed into a pair of boots and set up a stove. Placing the soaked boots beside the stove, she then went to uncover the pot to warm the food, allowing Su Fengnian to do as he pleased. He picked up a small stool and sat by the door. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see the corner of the young lady's boudoir. It was a small table and cabinet, simple and clean. The sky gradually darkened, but the reflection of the snow made it brighter than usual. The doors of the other houses in the courtyard were tightly shut to block out the wind and snow. Just as Su Fengnian was sizing her up, the door across from him opened with a squeak. The young child who had been thrown to the ground by the goat-horned girl earlier ran out. His lips were red and his teeth white. When he grew up, he would most likely be an elegant and charming scholar. But when the child saw the stranger who had angered Master Qi in the pavilion, he was a little timid. He stood at the door, not knowing whether to advance or retreat. A middle-aged man who was reading softly with an ancient scroll in his hand somehow came to the door. He followed his son's line of sight and saw Su Fengnian sitting on the stool. He thought for a moment, held the book with one hand behind his back, and stepped over the threshold. He approached the door of the Ouyang family and smiled. "Little wooden fish, do you have a guest?" The elegant man spoke politely and nodded at Su Fengnian with a smile. Su Fengnian also stood up and greeted politely, "Greetings to Mr. Ji Shang." This way of saying things was normal, but the advantage was that there would be no mistakes. Everyone in the court laughed that those who swept the floor and did odd jobs in the academy could be respectfully addressed as Mr. Outside. The goat-horned girl nicknamed Little Wooden Fish poked her head out of the kitchen and smiled. "Hello, Uncle Qin." After exchanging some pleasantries, Mr. Qin turned around and left. When he closed the door, the sound was slightly louder. Only then did the goat-horned girl snort. "This fellow can be considered as Qi Shen's personal helper. Every now and then, he would exchange poems. He has some knowledge, but he doesn't have any strength of character. These years, he has earned quite a bit of money. Every now and then, he would come to my house and say that he wants to move away. He says that it's better to be close to a neighbor, but every time he talks, he would say that he lives in a private residence not far from Grand Chancellor Wang. He's just showing off his family's wealth to my parents." Su Fengnian took the bowl of rice and chewed slowly. He raised his head and smiled at his little daughter who was eating while standing. "You have to see others doing well." The little girl rolled her eyes. "You're the only one with a lot of principles." Su Fengnian suddenly changed the topic and said with a naughty smile, "But when it comes to poems, other than giving them to friends, the people who do most of it are scholars and famous prostitutes in brothels. I don't know who is the prostitute between you, Uncle Qin, and first young master of Qi." The goat-horned girl blushed when she heard that, but her eyes were filled with heartfelt joy. She smiled and said, "You're so mean." After eating, the little girl patted her round tummy and burped in an unladylike manner. Su Fengnian took the bowl and chopsticks and was about to go to the kitchen when the goat-horned girl had a shocked expression as though she had seen an immortal or a ghost. Su Fengnian, who was holding the bowl and chopsticks with both hands, said with a smile, "Only a gentleman stays away from the kitchen. Do you think I look like one?" The little girl said with a pained expression, "Sister, you has really met the wrong person to meet you." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Yes." After slowly washing the bowl and chopsticks, Su Fengnian used his sleeve as a rag to dry his hands. The little girl sat by the stove and held her cheeks in a daze. Su Fengnian was still sitting on the small stool. The little girl glanced at the dense snow outside the door and sighed helplessly.
If it wasn't snowing, I would be able to count the stars at night. I can count to more than 1,000. Isn't that amazing? Su Fengnian smiled and nodded. Amazing. The goat-horned girl curled her lips and said, You're not sincere. Su Fengnian followed her and looked outside the door in silence. After a long time he said softly, When I was young, I heard the adults say that the starry sky at night is a big lantern full of fireflies. The little girl laughed and said, When I see fireflies in summer, I kill them one by one. Su Fengnian glanced at the goat-horned girl who was laughing evilly. Whoever marries you in the future will be unlucky. The little girl held her cheeks and said sadly, That's right. At dusk, a thin old man slowly walked into the courtyard. He was wearing a green robe and hemp shoes, and there was a suet jade pendant hanging from his waist. There were thousands of people in the school. The goat-horned girl believed that she had a photographic memory, but she still didn't recognize this old man. Su Fengnian, however, knew him. He was a terrible chess player who thought that he was the top national chess player. Back then, at the top of Mount Qingliang, he was evenly matched with Su Xiao. He was good at reversing his moves, and Su Fengnian had a headache watching the game. However, this old man was his second sister's master, and he deserved to be called the #1 person in the world who was good at chess. Under the side eye of the goat-horned girl, the old man casually sat down and asked shamelessly, Little girl, do you still have food? Although the little girl was shrewish, her upbringing was very good and strict. She stood up and smiled. Sir, my family has food. Su Fengnian reached out and secretly took the jade pendant from the waist of the old man who had almost become the Grand Chancellor of the Xianxia Academy. He handed it to the little girl and said, These are worthless scraps of white jade. Just take it as the payment for our meal. The old man's expression was normal. He nodded with a smile and didn't give the little girl a chance to refuse. If you don't accept it, I won't eat it. The little girl shook her head hard and said seriously, Can we not be so tacky? Su Fengnian and Chancellor Wang looked at each other and smiled. Su Fengnian didn't return the jade pendant to the Chancellor. The latter waited for the little girl to go to the kitchen to cook and asked calmly, I have 600 people. Do you dare to eat Bailiang? Su Fengnian thought for a while. There are only people who starve to death. I've never heard of people who eat to death. The old man shook his head and said in a low voice, Not necessarily. Su Fengnian smiled and said, It's hard to say if half of these people can reach Bailiang in the end. They won't eat to death in Bailiang. The old man nodded and said, That's true. Chapter 821. The goat-horned girl was very considerate and didn't care that the two guests had stolen the limelight. Seeing that they looked like they were going to talk in the middle of the night, she lit up 2 thick red candles in the hall and went to her boudoir to flip through her books. The door was half closed and there was a small gap. She was willing to light up the lamp, so she secretly squatted by the door and read with the help of the faint light. The number of chancellors and teachers in Xianxia Academy were as many as the hairs on a cow, but there were only a few who could be evaluated as a master. Back then, Chancellor Wang won the debate between name and reality, lost the battle between heaven and man and lost to the current Grand Chancellor of the Academy. In terms of weight, he was still ranked in the top 3 in the Academy. In terms of the talent of eloquence, no one could beat him. At this moment, Chancellor Wang bent over and stretched out his hand to warm himself by the fire on the stove. The light shone on his weathered face and he occasionally picked up a peanut from the bowl and threw it into his mouth. Su Fengnian sat on a small stool and carried the girl's favorite pair of brocade boots. He controlled the fire and roasted them slowly at a height away from the burning charcoal in the stove. In this way, no matter how prestigious their identities were, both of them had a rustic vibe and didn't look like clay bodhisattvas who were worshipped high above. The two of them didn't speak hastily even though the situation was urgent and could be said to be urgent. After all, the affairs of the world couldn't be discussed with one's hands and couldn't be regretted. Chancellor Wang was serious this time and his mood wasn't relaxed. Scholars only talked on paper and often had high standards but little ability. Chancellor Wang spent his whole life studying the art of maneuvering, but no matter how good the plan was, it still had to be done by people. Once a piece was placed on the chessboard, it couldn't be changed again. However, how could a living person be so simple? Who would be willing to be a puppet or a pawn to cross the river? This was also the root of Chancellor Wang's carelessness in playing chess. The chessboard and chess pieces were all dead objects. Otherwise, if he were to choose a talented person to govern the country, he could just casually pick a few famous national players. When the little girl who was hiding behind the door to read her book was flipping through the pages,
She glanced at the white-haired man outside the door. She definitely couldn't hate him, but if she were to say that she liked him at the first awakening of love, she wouldn't. Firstly, she was still young, and secondly, in the matters between men and women, it wasn't as if the other person was good enough for her to like him. Love didn't start and end. Who could say for sure what fate was? The goat horn girl was influenced by her family of scholars and felt that she would still find a scholar like her father in the future. The warm and handsome guy in the hall outside the house was good, but unfortunately, he wasn't her cup of tea. The little girl didn't have any intention of eavesdropping, so she withdrew her thin thoughts and subconsciously dipped her finger in her saliva. She gently flipped through the book and put it in her mouth before smacking it. Her mouth was filled with the fragrance of ink, and she laughed to herself. Her parents always said that this habit of hers wasn't good, that it wasn't easy to collect books, and that it was detestable to destroy books. However, how could this little girl care about these things? She wouldn't change even after repeated admonishment. In the hall, Chancellor Wang finally opened his mouth slowly. Don't think about victory, think about defeat first. Let's talk about the worst. Among the 600 people, the teachers and scholars are roughly divided into 2 and 8. Among them, a small half of the scholars from Wuxia have been sent by me to study and lecture in Old Shu, Jizhou, Xiangfan and other places using various excuses. Half of the teachers from Wuxia have opened private academies within 800 miles of Beiliang or have attached themselves to the local dignitaries. It's relatively easy for these people to enter Beiliang, but we can't rule out the possibility that the imperial court is secretly watching them. Once there's any movement, the imperial court will kill them and eliminate them. If these people are like this, don't even talk about those who are studying in the palace. The relationship between the Su and Zhao families has been exhausted. With such a large-scale migration, not to mention the difficulties of the prefectures and counties along the way, even Zhugo might be mobilized. This bunch of teachers and scholars who are not much better than delicate girls can't withstand a few trampling of iron hooves. To put it bluntly, a slightly elite Liang soldier can pick out a stick of candied haw with a thrust of his spear. Your Highness said that less than half of them have arrived in Beiliang. It's not an exaggeration to scare people. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "We'll deal with whatever comes our way." The Liang cavalry and Zhu Go, who are experts in assassination, are used to eating meat, but are our Beiliang secret agents vegetarians? When we were eating meat with big bowls back then, weren't they still eagerly waiting to drink soup on the side? My Shifu once specifically left a brocade pouch for us to deal with this matter, and now we've already begun to launch countermeasures. The geographical advantage is in Liang, but the weather, people, and peace are two different things. Although we can't say that it's all in Beiliang, it's still a bit better than the difficult situation of the past few years. First of all, when Beiliang dispatched troops to raid several towns on the border of Beimang, Second Sister even led troops to kill all the way to the capital of the southern dynasties, making Beimang exhausted from dealing with them. Then there was the devil Luo Yang, who spent a year brazenly going south last year, luring and killing countless iron cavalry and elite troops. Beiliang raised a large number of Jianghu dogs. In the past, they were used to guard against the infiltration of Beimang's Jianghu forces to the south, for fear that this group of desperados would not kill the heavily guarded powerful officials and meritorious deeds. They specifically selected the soft persimmons who were only at the threshold of the ranked class to assassinate them. Now, they could be transferred to Liang's borders. If Beimang dared to loot a burning house and tried to form a tacit understanding with the Zhao family, then they would let Su Shao fight again. Coincidentally, the newly appointed Protector General of Beiliang, Chu Lushan, and the cavalry commander Yuan Zuozong were both worrying about how to deal with the new officials. If Beimang were to be implicated, even Zhong Hongwu and Yan Wenluan would be happy to see it happen. Moreover, Zhugo of Liang had ruthlessly killed a number of the top spies in Zhugo when Chao Chongqing was welcoming the princess. Now, it had not recovered its strength. Beiliang's death warriors were not good at fighting in battle formations, but they were still good at this kind of covert operations. If they were to fight Zhugo, they would barely not be at a disadvantage. Also, those elite death warriors who spent too much energy and effort to protect me can also be sent to coordinate with the military spies that Beiliang has long since established. Don't forget, the Beiliang cavalry is the best in the world mainly because of the scouts. If the Zhao family and the imperial court fall out with each other and do not hesitate to send more than 1,000 soldiers, then they can't blame them for kicking an iron plate. The old man sighed. When the time comes, this chessboard will be a scene of intersecting fangs. The old man withdrew his hands that were burned by the stove fire and rubbed his thin cheeks. Maybe there will be blood everywhere.
Chapter 822. Su Fengnian said calmly, "You can't ask for a horse carriage but not feed the horse. There's no such good thing in the world. My Su family doesn't rebel or usurp the throne. We guard the northwest gate for your Zhao family. Ordinary people raise a dog to guard their house and still know how to give food. Zhao family, on the other hand, thinks all day long about this dog whose only weakness is that it doesn't know how to wag its tail and beg for mercy. They quickly starve its fur and bones and then find a good time to stew a pot of dog meat and eat to their heart's content. Even a cornered dog knows how to jump over a wall, let alone the Bailiang cavalry that rolled out of blood." Su Fengnian suddenly smiled and put down the girl's old boots that he had already roasted. He used an iron tongs to poke at the charcoal fire. "However, if I were the son of Zhao or the crown prince, I would also be on tenterhooks towards the Su family. How can I allow others to snore beside my bed? It's just that understanding is one thing, but if you want me to accept it, it's absolutely impossible." The old man smiled knowingly and no longer called Su Fengnian Your Highness. He became more intimate. "You brat, your words are quite reasonable, but your actions are skewed." Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. "It's not easy to be the head of the household. Children who make noise get candy. If you don't make a scene and roll around a few times, how can other people take you seriously?"
Chancellor Wang chuckled. "Then how can it be even better?"
Su Fengnian followed suit and his eyebrows became more relaxed. He laughed heartily. "Speaking of this makes me feel better." Unexpectedly, the old man shook his head. "I have to pour cold water on you first. Let's assume that more than half of the 600 people will make it to Bailiang alive. Have you ever thought about what will happen when there are too many monks and too little porridge? All the scholars in the world are watching how Bailiang will settle these people down. Bailiang's land is narrow and barren. Although there are many official hats, they can't be given away casually. If you give away too many, the official hats won't be worth anything. After you've settled down, no one will be willing to continue working hard for you. Besides, the local forces in Bailiang had their roots intertwined, and most of them were military families that emerged from the Spring and Autumn War. When a dispute arose, who would they side with? Blindly favoring someone was destined to be inhumane. Those who were favored grew more and more greedy, while those who were neglected grew jealous and resentful. The most difficult part about this was that it wasn't just the blood-stained military affairs that were annoying, it was also the trivial family affairs that were disgusting. I know that after you took over Chen Jibao, you began to deliberately change the image of a foppish young master in Bailiang. Especially that group of veteran soldiers who have been through hundreds of battles changed their opinion of you. It was not easy. Aren't you afraid that this time, when you set up your own school and enter Bailiang, your efforts will be in vain? Scolding you for being an embroidered pillow who squanders money?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "As a married woman, the happiest thing in life is not only being able to see eye to eye with your husband, but also two things that are extremely important. The father-in-law is impartial, and the mother-in-law is considerate. Bailiang is thirsty for talented people, but there are many fine horses, but there aren't many Bo Lu. Without the hundreds of people from Shangyin School, didn't the Su family gain a firm foothold in Bailiang? Didn't they beat Beimang until Beimang couldn't raise its head? As for the local tyrants of Bailiang, there are many things that Su Shao can't do. I don't mind being the bad guy at all. You have a good relationship with Su Shao, and you rely on this relationship to take advantage of the common people in Bailiang. But you don't have that kind of relationship with me, Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian didn't rely on them to get to where he is today. I'm not biased towards anyone. I'm just trying to reason with the local tyrant and the river dragon. Outside of northern Liang, I might not be able to reason with you. But in northern Liang, if you don't reason with me, I'll make sure you suffer the consequences of your actions. If you're a local tyrant, then you can rely on your military exploits to become rich field showing or control the military affairs of various provinces and counties. It doesn't matter. These are all things you deserve. However, your table manners are too bad, and you've damaged the foundation of the Su family's wall. A hoe here and a hammer there dug dog holes, causing a perfectly sturdy wall to leak air from all sides. Don't blame me for using your corpses to fill the holes. If you are a local tyrant, as long as you don't pretend to be virtuous and do things honestly, you will have an official's hat, gold and silver, and you won't lack women. Bailiang's narrow territory also has its advantages, and that is, everywhere you go is under the Su family's nose. Everything you do can be seen. What the Su family does is nothing more than the word justice.
As for the earnest advice, I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you, old teacher.
I think you will also be cursed behind your back.
Chancellor Wang nodded and said, with justice and a woman's heart, this bunch of pitiful newlyweds who have lost their maternal families. As long as they are diligent and thrifty, they won't have to worry about not being able to make a name for themselves. There will definitely be bumps and bruises, but at least they won't be so miserable that they have to hang themselves and jump into a well.
That's enough. They aren't delicate young ladies from influential families.
As long as they have good in-laws who put themselves in their shoes, they will be able to endure hardships. Su Fengnian smiled and joked. The first time I saw old teacher playing against Su Xiao at the top of Mount Qingliang, your words were refined. It's probably because you are interacting with a vulgar person like me that your words are also vulgar. Old teacher shook his head and said self-deprecatingly, this is called choosing the right medicine for the illness depending on the person. Interacting with the king of Beiliang, the #1 boorish man in Liang, if I deliberately try to worm my way into being friends with him, I will have to deliberately put my arm around his shoulder and drink a lot of wine and eat a lot of meat.
Wouldn't that make things difficult for this old man?
Besides, the reason why the art of vertical and horizontal is also called the art of long and short is nothing more than using one's strong points against the enemy's weak points. Speaking of which, I would like to be bold enough to test His Royal Highness. What are the strengths and weaknesses of Beiliang and Liang?
Su Fengnian said helplessly, old teacher, you will have to ask Su Beiji or Chen Shiliang about this. I am not willing to expose my own weak points.
Does this count as grasping the surface of the art of long and short?
Chancellor Wang gave a soft hum. Su Fengnian asked softly, this young lady's surname is Ouyang. Her grandfather's surname is Ouyang. He is from Takaoka. Has old teacher heard of him?
Chancellor Wang said calmly, the young lady's father is half a student of mine. He doesn't think highly of Beiliang, so he won't follow her to Beiliang.
Su Fengnian nodded. That was good too. Xianxia Academy had suffered such a big change.
In order to calm the people down, the academy and the imperial court would definitely have a better life in the future with the knowledge of the goat-horned girl's father. Su Fengnian stood up. Then let's go.
Chancellor Wang stood up and smiled. Aren't you going to say goodbye? Su Fengnian smiled. That girl hates tacky people. The two of them walked out of the house quietly. After Su Fengnian closed the door, he hung the jade pendant that he had stolen on the way on the grape rack. On the second day, the wind and snow stopped. A huge snowman that was as tall as a few people stood beside the Buddha's Palm Lake in Xianxia Academy. The goat-horned girl ran all the way to Yu Youwei's courtyard and screamed excitedly. Sister Yu, there is a huge snowman beside the lake. It looks like you. Chapter 823. A group of strange travelers appeared on the road.
8 of them were carrying a palanquin that was neither a bed nor a couch.
It was similar to the palanquin used by the royal family of the old southern Tang Empire. A wide gauze canopy was added to the top of the palanquin.
Vaguely, one could see the graceful figure of a woman behind the palanquin.
She was an extremely seductive beauty. In front of the palanquin was a beautiful ceremonial official dressed in green. She was holding an ivory palanquin. Tied around her waist was a bag of golden silk fish made in the old southern Tang Empire. She seemed to be walking slowly, but in fact, she was gliding rather quickly.
The 8 servants were unusually burly and walked as if they were flying.
Even in the winter, they were bare-chested. Compared with the young and delicate ceremonial official, they were even more eye-catching. Beside the palanquin was a middle-aged machete man with a black veil on his head.
His beard was so long that it was almost impossible for him to be so arrogant. On the official road, most of the people who dared to be so ostentatious were high-ranking officials and dignitaries. If they were Wulin people, then they would be extraordinary.
Today's Jianghu was divided by the so-called heroes. Compared to the martial artists of the spring and autumn period, they could not be mentioned in the same breath. Even the top sect of Jianghu, Dragon Tiger Mountain, which had the same surname as the emperor, was in the wilderness and Prime Minister Qingci was in the court. The north and south were in harmony with each other, but they did not dare to be arrogant.
This group of people was so maverick that they attracted a lot of attention on the road.
Among them was a pair of young palanquins who had just met each other. They rode their horses separately. The older palanquin was riding an inferior horse.
He reined in the horse to make way for them. With an envious face, he whispered to his companion, "Look, they must be like us.
They are going to participate in the martial arts assembly at the Quick Snow Mountain Villa. If I'm not wrong, They should be the second-to-none dragon palace in the old southern Tang Empire. Only they dare to show such an overstepping and violating etiquette. They have no choice. The palace master of the Dragon Palace is the wet nurse of the youngest son of the king of Yanqi with the support of such a powerful vassal king in the dynasty. Even the Jidushi who held the tiger tally in the southern Tang Empire would not say anything. I heard that this generation of the Dragon Palace has a talented woman. Hey, if she takes a fancy to me, my life will be worth it. Not to mention her, any of the fairies in the Dragon Palace would do. Huang Liang's companion was a young, white-haired nobody. Huang Liang was poor, and he was not a generous man. He did not manage to earn any money this year, so he was living a poor life. Earlier, he met this young man drinking alone in a small town. He shamelessly asked Huang Liang to bring him along, and when he heard that a martial arts assembly was going to be held at Snowfast Mountain Villa, he asked Huang Liang to bring him along. Huang Liang did not have to worry about food and drink along the way, and was lucky enough to stay in a first-class room in a few luxurious inns. Therefore, he began to see Xueqi in a new light. To be precise, he was impressed by Xueqi's wealth, and in his heart, he still regarded this generous man as a fool. Huang Liang was happy to consider himself an experienced Jianghu veteran, and showed him some of the Jianghu stories he had heard. At this time, when he saw Xueqi's confused face after hearing about the Dragon Palace and the King of Yen, it confirmed his view of this kid as a newborn calf. He took off the wine bag that Xueqi bought with money from his waist, raised his head and took a big gulp. Then he wiped it with his sleeve and said with a smile, "If you haven't heard about the Dragon Palace, then I'll have to explain it to you. In the Jianghu world of Liang, not to mention the Dragon Tiger Mountain, the Wu family, the Sword Tomb, and the 2 Zen temples, which came out of the secular world at will, are too far away from Jianghu. The real first-class schools that can be called the peak of Jianghu are the Sword Pool of Dongyue, the Bull Gang of the Shenyuan family, the Wild Goose Castle on the border of Jizhou, the Spring Invitation Cottage in western Shu, and then the Dragon Palace and the Quick Snow Mountain Villa. As for the third-class schools and gangs, most of them are influential figures in a province. It's not very nice to say that they are third-class, but they can't be underestimated. Generally, they have 1 or 2 grandmasters as their stabilizing force. There's no need to talk about the 4th class and the bottom class sections. I was once valued by a big shot in the Pure Heart Pavilion, which was one of the best in the county. He saw that I had a good foundation and was expected to be a direct disciple. Unfortunately, I was snatched away by a government official who wanted to practice martial arts. That bastard is not serious about practicing martial arts. He's just a dog in the latrine pit. Apart from hurting a few senior and junior sisters, he doesn't show up in the sect more than a few times a year. Chapter 824. As expected, the young chick beside him, who had just entered Jianghu and did not know the dangers of Jianghu, looked indignant, as if he wanted to fight for justice for Huang Liang. This made Huang Liang, who was wearing a heavy expression, laugh inwardly. It was true, and Pure Heart Pavilion was a famous sect in Jianghu, but that person was not Huang Liang.
He had heard from the gossip of the people in the city that the young man who was swapped had a miserable end.
He had only said a few angry words, but his hands and feet were broken by a group of retainers on the same day. It was also in this harsh winter that he was thrown to the roadside like a dead dog. Xueqi, or Su Fengnian, looked up and saw the 8-barreled palanquin flying away like a swan treading on the snow. After leaving Shangyin Academy, Su Fengnian did not go with Chancellor Wang. However, with Yuan Zuozong in the light and Chu Lushan in the dark, there should not be any mistakes. If there was no accident, this was probably the last time he had the mood to wander around Jianghu. Su Fengnian wanted to return to Bailiang alone, so he did not even bring Wu, the man of sacrifice, with him, which made him very sad when he parted. According to Huang Liang, Jianghu was finally annoyed and no longer lifeless. The reason was that the Dongyue sword pool, which had a high status among the first-class sects, took the lead and the Spring Invitation Cottage of Western Shu agreed. They asked the Quick Snow Mountain Villa to be the host, intending to choose a person who could convince the masses to sit on the throne of the Wulin alliance that had been vacant for decades. The reappearance of the devil cult, the emergence of their disciples and grand-disciples, and Mad Monk's journey to the east, had gradually caused the entire Jianghu to show signs of magnificence. Su Fengnian did not look at the ripples on the water, wondering if the Dongyue sword pool and the Spring Invitation Cottage had been instructed by the imperial court to imitate Bailiang and start to reorganize the forces in Jianghu. Dongyue sword pool had been the imperial court's dog-beating stick for years, beating anyone who was not convinced. After Chen Zhibao entered Shu, The spring invitation cottage had been flirting with each other openly. Now that Chen Zhibao was the Minister of War and would be crowned king in 2 years, it was reasonable for them to be restless. While Su Fengnian was lost in thought, the ceremonial officer of Dragon Palace who was holding the tablet turned around and walked toward him. Her footsteps were light and agile, leaving no trace on the ground. In the eyes of ordinary Jianghu people, it would be feared. In Jianghu, old monks, old Taoists, and old nuns would not provoke them if they could. Moreover, the beautiful woman in green in front of him was outstanding. Since she dared to enter Jianghu, especially those heroines who fought alone, she must have some strange martial art skills. The graceful and moving woman held a plain white elephant tablet with both hands and bowed to Su Fengnian. She did not look like a woman from a poor family from an aristocratic family who curtsied. Indeed, it was in line with her ceremonial official attire, as if she was a courtier greeting each other. When she raised her head, the corners of her mouth lifted slightly. She looked at Su Fengnian, who was riding on the horse, and said in a pleasant voice, "My family's miss invites you to the imperial carriage for a chat." Huang Liang opened his mouth in surprise. His heart was filled with jealousy, and his mood immediately became gloomy. When a Jianghu man with no family background married into a prestigious sect and brought home a beautiful woman and countless secret manuals, most of them would not find it shameful. Instead, they would regard it as a wonderful thing. For example, drunken sword Zhao Hongdan married into a rich family and brought home a beautiful woman, like a rootless duckweed planted in a fertile garden. His sword cultivation had improved by leaps and bounds. Without hesitation, Su Fengnian dismounted from the horse and led it away. Huang Liang wanted to rise to the top like he always did when the beautiful ceremonial officer took a step forward and shook her head. This made Huang Liang, who had just dismounted from the horse, want to dig a hole and hide in it. Fortunately, Xueqi, who had stepped on dog poop, did not turn his head, and the beautiful woman did not ridicule him. Instead, she turned and led the way. The palanquin stopped quietly at the side of the road. The beautiful ceremonial officer squatted in front of the palanquin and stretched out her hand. She looked up and signaled Su Fengnian to step on her hand, and she would help him enter the palanquin. Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. He just handed the reins to her and asked, "The soles of my shoes are a little dirty. Is it okay to dirty your lady's tent?" The beautiful ceremonial officer, who was leading the horse with one hand and holding the tablet with the other, smiled gently and said, "It's okay. After you enter the tent, I'll help you take off your shoes." The bearded man frowned. He held the saber in his hand and stared at Su Fengnian covetously. Su Fengnian faced the gauze tent, cupped his fist and said, "Su Fengnian has disturbed fairy." She then tiptoed and slipped into the gauze curtain. The woman was in her 30s and had a dignified appearance. However, even though she was kneeling on the ground, one could still vaguely see that her legs were long and slender. The side of her round buttocks that were squeezed out from her kneeling posture were even more alluring. Only an old flower expert would know the uniqueness of a woman's figure. Seeing Su Fengnian enter the tent, the woman smiled politely and gracefully. She quietly added a piece of spice into a thick, glazed green porcelain stove beside her. Su Fengnian did not bother the ceremonial officer to take off his shoes. Instead, he took them off himself. The ceremonial officer had already put away the tablet and handed Su Fengnian's horse to the bearded man. She took the strange man's boots with both hands. There was no difference on her pretty face. The incense burner was slightly tipsy, which was originally used for lavender to avoid filth. Su Fengnian took off the hook and let down the gauze curtain. He sat cross-legged with the fairy of the Dragon Palace. She did not speak. Su Fengnian glanced at the incense burner out of the corner of his eye. The incense burner was painted with pictures of swords. Under the fragrance, the porcelain surface flowed like a lake, like a lifelike picture of a swordsman wielding his sword. This incense burner was vaguely a superior swordsmanship manual. Su Fengnian smiled knowingly. Jianghu people said that the Dragon Palace had all kinds of treasures and was as rich as a country. They were once a big parasite of the old southern Tang. The woman, who might have been a married woman, smiled and asked, "Do you also practice swordsmanship?" Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Yes, I have. May I know why fairy asked me to take the carriage?" The woman stared at Su Fengnian and said calmly, "Do you know a prophecy left by the first-generation founder of the Dragon Palace?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "My knowledge is shallow. I don't know." The woman did not mind and said, It's hard to paint the skin but not the bones. You may know the face but not the heart. Our dragon palace has always been famous for drawing tigers and dragons. We are also good at observing people's bones. Su Fengnian spouted nonsense. When I was young, the fortune teller said that I would either become a hero or be hacked to death by a hero in the future. He estimated that my bone structure was not bad. Fairy, how could you tell from so far away? Then Fairy of the Dragon Palace, you really have the ability of an immortal. The woman was obviously otherworldly. She was not used to such vulgar words and did not know how to respond. For a moment, there was only the fragrance and the sound of a needle falling could be heard. Chapter 825. Su Fengnian did not intend to pretend to be deaf and mute all the way to the Snow Villa. He smiled and said, I have never heard of the words of the founder of the Dragon Palace, but I have heard that the Dragon Palace has a treasure called the Black Flower Cloud Dragon Pattern Sensor. It symbolizes the eternal stability of the Southern Tang dynasty. Its outer wall is covered with black and purple spots. Once it is put into the sensor and it burns, the mist will rise and the image of 9 dragons coming out of the sea will appear. Upon hearing this, the woman smiled. Her appearance was not eye-catching, but it set off her classical temperament and made her even more outstanding. She said softly, Young Master Su is indeed the son of an official. Ordinary landowning households would not know of this Southern Tang's treasure. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, Is the Dragon Palace competing for the position of the Wulin Alliance? The woman asked, Young Master, do you think the Dragon Palace is qualified to compete for the Jianghu? Su Fengnian waved his hand and said self-deprecatingly, I don't dare to criticize. The woman was bending down to pick up the censer with copper chopsticks. She paused and glanced at Su Fengnian. After putting it into the censer, she seemed to have nothing to say. When Su Fengnian staggered and fell to the ground, she, who had been quietly holding her breath, waved her hand slightly to disperse some of the fragrance. She changed from kneeling to squatting. Her 2 fingers stopped at the tip of Su Fengnian's nose. She said to herself, You even know that the black flower censer secretly came from the Southern Tang Imperial Palace to the Dragon Palace. How can you not know that our sect is good at making human skin puppets with suitable bone structure? You should know that one of the 4 grandmasters, Fu Jianghongjia, was born in the Dragon Palace. The woman stared at Su Fengnian's face and sneered, You are really calm. While speaking, her 2 fingers were like the tip of a sword and her fingertips were like the tip of a sword. She fiercely poked Su Fengnian's eyes. Her fingertips were not too far away from his eyelids, but the man still did not move. The woman said, Did he really faint? The woman who did not retract her fingers had a flash of ruthlessness in her eyes. Just as her killing intent was flowing, Su Fengnian was still lying, but one hand held the woman's fingers and the other hand was strangling her neck. The woman was stunned. The first 2 probing was just a pretense. The 3rd time was the real killing intent. For the Dragon Palace, a good skin was priceless. No matter whether the man on the ground fainted or not, it did not stop her killing intent. The cat and mouse play. The cat and mouse. Su Fengnian opened his eyes and stared at the fairy of the Dragon Palace with a vicious heart. He chuckled softly and said, You really want to kill me? I have given you a chance to be the compassionate Guanyin. It is good for us to meet by chance and love each other. The woman was speechless. Her eyes were full of horror. A few small red snakes slowly slithered on the arm of the man with a head full of white frost. Then they suddenly pierced into her arm like a glutton. The gentle woman who was originally covered with the water vapor of the south of the Yangtze River quickly withered. When Su Fengnian let go of her, she had already silently stopped breathing. He supported her leaning body with one hand and gently tapped her temples with the other. He slowly tore off a delicate mask. Under the mask was the face of the blue-green ceremonial official who walked in front of the 8 palanquins. After a long illness, he became a doctor. He had used a lot of masks that were related to witchcraft during his trip to Beimang. He was not a layman when it came to the art of disguise. Su Fengnian threw away the face that was equivalent to the rooting level of Shu Xiao. After laying the body flat, he picked up the spatula and skillfully scraped off some incense ashes. When it came to pretending to be cultured, what was he not good at as the son of Bailiang? Su Fengnian turned his head and casually glanced at the ceremonial official, with the Southern Tang-style silk fish hanging from his waist. The latter was indifferent to the corpse. His smile did not diminish and his eyes were playful. Su Fengnian asked, Who is she? Who are you?
The blue-green lady stretched out a finger and stroked her temples. She squinted her eyes and said softly, "She is the current me. My real appearance is uglier than the one you took off. I don't dare to show my face to others." Su Fengnian put back the spatula. The mysterious lady said straightforwardly, "Originally, I thought that the journey to the Quick Snow Mountain Villa was boring and I wanted to make a new puppet to relieve my boredom. Now I feel that it is too wasteful. Why don't you come to the Dragon Palace and be a tripod furnace? Many men in Jianghu dream of it. Although it will dry up and be abandoned in 3 to 5 years, it is still much better than being made into a human skin puppet. Most of the women in the Dragon Palace are as beautiful as flowers and jade. They sing every night and enjoy happiness for several years. Even if you are a pewter spearhead, you can still have fun with 20 or 30 fairies. It is better than living a boring life with 1 or 2 old women." Su Fengnian said helplessly, "Miss, where does your confidence come from?" The lady tilted her head and asked, "Are you the emperor of Liang's family?" Su Fengnian shook his head. The lady asked again, "Have you reached the 1st grade of Vajra realm, or have you comprehended the mystery of finger mystery?" Su Fengnian still shook his head. The lady asked, "Then are you the son-in-law of Grand Secretary Zhang Julu or Gu Jiantang?" Su Fengnian was amused. He laughed and said, "Are you done asking?" The 8 palanquins sank a few feet in an instant. The 8 strong and burly retainers knelt down almost at the same time. Su Fengnian's left hand grabbed the lady's face like hooks. The lady's face was bleeding. His right hand slowly rotated and several flying swords were nailed into her vital acupoints. If she dared to use qi to resist, she would be nailed to death on the spot. Su Fengnian slightly increased the strength of his 5 fingers. Perhaps the lady's face was covered with blood and she was gasping for breath. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Do you really think you are invincible just because of the fake Vajra secret skill of the Dragon Palace?" The reason why the Dragon Palace was able to stand tall was because of the snake entangling tortoise, which was derived from the red armor of the Talisman General, and a few shortcut Shen finger skills. In the end, it was neither a donkey nor a horse. It was a laughingstock. How many genuine level 1 masters would take these women seriously? If you want to be a master like Wang Xianji, you can't do it with the unorthodox methods of the Dragon Palace. In the past, your palace master tried to give herself to Wang Xianji to take Yang to nourish Yin. As a result, she was slapped into a pulp by old monster Wang before she could take off her clothes. In my opinion, if a lady is too ugly, she shouldn't be in Jianghu. The lady gnashed her teeth and said, "Who are you? Why do you know so much about the secrets of the Dragon Palace?" Su Fengnian loosened his 5 fingers and smiled without saying a word. The lady, who was decisive, shouted outside the gauze tent, "Keep going!" The lady, who was waiting for an opportunity to reward the white-haired young man with a mystery of finger skills, spat out a mouthful of blood without warning. It turned out that a flying sword had penetrated her body. The green flying sword circled back to its master's fingers. Su Fengnian sneered, "Still not giving up?" The lady stuck out her tongue to lick away the blood and swallowed it along with her saliva. Her eyes were cold and she said in a charming tone, "What a good sword manipulation art of the Wu family sword tomb." Su Fengnian pointed at his white hair and said with a smile, "Based on this and the turmoil in Great Peace City, you actually guessed my identity but didn't dare to say it? Afraid that I would kill you?" The lady was silent. Su Fengnian asked directly, "This time, the Dragon Palace went to the Quick Snow Mountain Villa to join in the fun. Did the king of Yanqi, Zhao Bing, and Nalan Yusi ask you to do anything?" The lady was expressionless. She seemed to have accepted her fate and was waiting for death. The 2 of them were only a few feet apart. Su Fengnian changed his attitude faster than flipping the pages of a book. He slapped his palm on her forehead. The woman's body was strangely still. Only her head shook for a long time. Blood flowed out of her 7 orifices. The concealed qi that she had gathered with great difficulty suddenly burst out. She covered her mouth. Scarlet blood seeped out from between her fingers and dripped onto the carpet. Su Fengnian slapped the lady's face with his right hand. Her head swayed to the left. She tried to move to the right because she could clearly feel a flying sword with undisguised cold sword energy hovering near her right ear. She did not want to have her head pierced by a sword for no reason. But Su Fengnian hit her when she was down. After the slap, he pressed his hand against her swollen cheek and pushed it towards the tip of the flying sword. This caused the resilient lady's heart to die in that instant. Her life was hanging by a thread.
It was not a good feeling to be so close. The lady closed her eyes. The man's palm was warm, but the flying sword near her ear was cold and piercing. The tip of the sword happened to touch her temple. A drop of blood slowly flowed down her pretty cheek. After opening her eyes, she sneered. Why? Are you worried that the secret skill of the Dragon Palace will die with me once I crush the pearl? Su Fengnian flicked his finger on her cheek. The flying sword returned to his sleeve. He said casually, the ladies of the Dragon Palace are like clams. Their cultivation varies. The pearls they cultivate are also different in size. The small pearls are as small as a grain of rice. They follow the flow of qi. The big pearls are as big as the Lingnan dragon eye. They turn into Taoist gang qi and occupy the dantian. The lady spat out a mouthful of blood. Su Fengnian stretched out his palm and easily blocked it. He glanced at the black-purple blood in his palm. It seeped into his skin and disappeared in a flash. He frowned. The lady laughed crazily. Chapter 826. Su Fengnian laughed. It's not good for some skills to be too famous. Just like the go set by a top national player, its first appearance is usually earth-shattering. Over time, there will be a way to break it. South of the southern Tang, the weather is gloomy, the sun is abundant, and the plants and springs all contain evil qi. The human qi is connected to the heaven and earth, so it naturally produces miasma. The Dragon Palace has been rooted in southern Xinjiang for a long time, so they fight poison with poison. They collect grass miasma in March, yellow plum miasma in May, and sweet osmanthus miasma in September. They are neither smoke nor fog, but they are mixed into the bloodline. When you spit it out, it is called dragon saliva, especially the blood essence. Even if you are a top expert, as long as you don't have the physique of a Vajra realm, your body will rot after a drop of it. The woman stopped smiling, raised her sleeve to cover her face, and wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth. She even looked shy and coquettish. She stared at the nobleman who was familiar with many secrets of the Dragon Palace. If you insist on killing me, I'll destroy both jade and common stone. If we talk nicely, maybe we can both be happy. Su Fengnian raised his palm, and the dragon saliva was forced out of his palm. The woman didn't panic and fell into deep thought. Su Fengnian sat near the incense burner and sighed. You really have an exquisite mind. If I were an ordinary person, even if I could suppress the dragon saliva, which is ranked in the top 5 of the southern borders gu arts, with the incense biscuits in the incense burner that require a guiding medicine, I'm afraid that when I bargain with you, I'll be dead. Also, the bearded man outside the palanquin was just a camouflage. He hasn't reached the first stage, and is at most a second stage master. Previously, when the 8 servants were forced to kneel, one of them didn't have to kneel, but he still hesitated and covered it up. It's really tiring to deal with you. Traps were set everywhere, and she was suppressed everywhere. No matter how determined the woman was, she finally showed signs of collapsing. She only heard the unfathomable young devil say something, which made her scratch her head in confusion. Do you want to have a taste of being skinned by a cat back in the days when the talisman General Red Armor was still alive? My technique is still immature, and I'm still trying to figure it out. Why don't you put up with it? Su Fengnian reached out and brushed the gauze curtain, pulling out a few white threads that were floating between his fingers. Her voice trembled as she said, I admit defeat. Su Fengnian smiled. His eyes were so sinister that she felt like she was the merciful goddess of mercy. The skin on her face was torn off by Beth. She lowered her head and held her bloody face. She said hoarsely, Yang Maoyang, Zhao Wei Ping, step back. In the Jianghu, if there was good fortune, there would also be bad fortune. He might obtain a secret manual for no reason, or he might be taken in as a disciple by an otherworldly expert. It was also possible that he would be half-crippled by an eccentric hermit expert without doing any evil deeds, or he would fail miserably in an easy task, and his reputation would be destroyed overnight. This was the allure of Jianghu. You would never know what kind of changes and opportunities you would encounter tomorrow. Generally speaking, the higher one's cultivation level, the smaller the variables. However, as long as one encountered one, it would be more difficult to resolve. Not to mention finding a needle in a haystack, there were only a handful of level 2 Master Realm Masters in each province. They rarely met each other and minded their own business. However, once a death grudge was formed, one side would usually end up in a miserable state. Su Fengnian stretched out a white thread and looked down. He didn't look at the woman who didn't have any arrogance at all. He said calmly, "I hope you can tell me everything you know." As they approached the Snow Mountain Villa, the 8 palanquins turned into the private road of the villa from the official road. The road became wider, and the snow was mostly cleared. One could see that the road stretched on. Close to 100 boys and girls with delicate features held brooms with silk handles. There were also managers of the villa welcoming them at the entrance. Every time a reputable person in Jianghu sent an invitation, there would be loud cheers from the villa. The 8-barreled palanquin and an ox cart entered at the same time. The driver had an arrogant expression on his face.
He was obviously a child who had just entered the school to learn how to read and write, but he carried a long sword with a dense sword aura on his back.
Behind him sat an old Confucian scholar in plain clothes.
He had the air of an immortal, and in his hand was an elegant and refined item that famous scholars would carry when they talked about it.
Ordinary people would look at him with respect, and he really had an otherworldly temperament.
Along the way, many Jianghu people who entered the private path of the villa hurriedly made way for him. As for some famous heroes who had the courage to approach and greet him, the old Confucian scholar sitting in the ox cart kept his eyes closed and did not pay any attention to them.
The Jianghu heroes who had hot faces but cold butts did not have the slightest dissatisfaction with this, and only felt that it was natural. The Snow Mountain Villa took the initiative to take on a heavy responsibility this time and spent money to organize this Jianghu event. In the end, they still had to look at the faces of the other 2 families. One was the Dongyue sword pool, which was strong enough to compete with the sword tomb of the Wu family for the title of the World Sword Forest. The other was the remote Shishu Spring Invitation Cottage. The former had sent Li Yibai, who was expected to be the next leader of the sword pool, and 18 sword servants. There were only 2 of them, but they were undoubtedly more important. The old Confucian scholar holding the tail of the bamboo stick was the current master of the Spring Invitation Cottage, Xianxia. His cultivation was unfathomable, and he had never fought with anyone in his life. However, it was said that the Confucian scholar who could exchange swordsmanship with the sword emperor of Shishu was only capable of condemning people in speech and writing. There was an uproar on the road. The 8 palanquins of the Dragon Palace and the ox cart of the cottage came into view. Then, another group of eye-catching people came into view. 18 female swordsmen in the same style of fox fur rode on white horses. Their sleeves were as white as snow, and they looked like fairies. Even their scabbards were as white as snow. It was an eye-opener. For generations, the Dongyue sword pool would choose young girls with spiritual chi sword embryos and carefully nurture them into sword servants. These girls had to remain virgins for life. They were swords and also chastity for the sword pool. However, the Snow Mountain Villa didn't see the Dongyue sword pool's self-proclaimed genius of swordsmanship, Li Yibai. There were 3 riders riding side by side. In the middle of them was a young man who looked spirited and bright, full of vitality. The rider on the left was dressed in black and had a horizontal blade at his waist. He had a cold expression and was tall and strong. His hair was slightly curled, and he looked heroic. The rider on the right was much inferior to his 2 companions. He had a short sword at his waist. He looked ordinary, had dark skin, and was short. When the man in the middle appeared on the private road of the Snow Mountain Villa, a large group of girls who had been waiting for a long time suddenly screamed. They shouted the words, "Qing Bai," with infatuation in their eyes. The young rider in black laughed softly and said, "Brother Qian, you're still in such high demand. Let me see. Oh, there really are a few beauties. Why don't you give some of them to me?" The handsome young man blushed. The black-clothed swordsman laughed and reached out to rub his face. "Brother Qian, oh Brother Qian, your skin is even thinner than a girl's." When the girls saw this scene, they were even more obsessed. The young man with the surname Qian, who was called Qing Bai, braced himself and purposely turned a blind eye. He brushed past the girls who adored him. His surname was Qian and his given name was Laifu. The surname Qian was a common surname, and the 2 words Laifu were far from Yangchun by Xue. It was really interesting that such an elegant young man was given such a tacky name by his parents. In fact, Qian Laifu was born in the Lianghuai aristocratic family. 200 years ago, it was a big family that even the emperor's daughter hated to marry. Now, it could be considered a prosperous family, especially Qian Laifu. He was good at making Qing Bai scholars' paper, imitating the Xianxia Hall in Shu. It was far better than the craftsmen of the Rui Pavilion in the capital. Even the Suzhou Wu Weaving Bureau could not compare. At first, he wrote poems for the Ichuan invitations in the inner hall of the palace to fill in the blanks on the walls and pillars. He was known as the flower of the palace. Later, it evolved to the point that all the ministers of the imperial court used this paper. He was also good at writing graceful poems, which were extremely sentimental and lingering. In the scholarly circles, he was known as the four little families of the literary world, along with the down-and-out young phoenix of the song family, Wang Chudong, who wrote The First Snow on the Spring God Lake, and Su Weisheng of Beiliang. Each of them had their own strengths, and Su Weisheng won first place. Not to mention the many noble ladies in the Liang dynasty who admired Qian Laifu, who was known as Qing Bai. There were also many heroines in the Jianghu who threatened to marry only him. On the 8 palanquin, Su Fengnian was sorting out his thoughts. The woman beside him, Lin Hongyuan, was actually the next palace master of the Dragon Palace. She admitted that this trip to the Quick Snow Mountain Villa was ordered by the King of Yen. Her main purpose was to help Li Yibai of the Dongyue Sword Pool to become the Wulin Alliance leader. For this, the Dongyue Sword Pool secretly gave the Dragon Palace 6 ancient treasured swords. Su Fengnian did not believe all of it. Lin Hongyuan's words were almost 90% true and 10% false, which was enough. This time, in the fight for the position of Wulin Alliance leader, Xianxia of the Spring Invitation Cottage was the most popular. Among the first-class sects, the Quick Snow Mountain Villa leaned towards the West Shu Cottage, which had been on good terms with them for generations. The sects and gangs in the southwest of Liang were also willing to join forces. However, it seemed that the young fort master of the Wild Goose Castle in Jizhou was also involved. This young lieutenant had an official status that no one dared to underestimate. There were also rumors that the young fort master of the Wild Goose Castle was very popular in the capital. He was brothers with the 2 sons of the former Minister of War, Gu Zhentang. He had even gone hunting with the first prince, Zhao Wu, many times. In addition, there were some stragglers, but compared to these 3 parties, they were not worth mentioning. However, the Wulin Alliance leader today was not like the past where they could not interact with the imperial court. As long as they became the alliance leader, it was almost equivalent to connecting with the imperial court and entering the emperor's sight. After being recruited, they could help the emperor govern the Jianghu. If this was not a great life-saving talisman, what was it? The cultural pulse of the Central Plains could still be connected, but unfortunately, the martial courage of the Jianghu had been broken. Su Fengnian said softly, the Spring Invitation Cottage, the Dongyue Sword Pool, and the Wild Goose Castle in Jizhou. They are all beautiful widows who can't keep their widowhood. There is someone secretly above. Chapter 827. The Xueqi Mountain Villa was located on the shore of the God of Spring South Lake, overlooking Hubei. The river was vast and majestic. After the heavy snow, the wonder of the sunset snow on the river was even more magnificent. The villa was built with ingenuity, and more than half of it was out of the lake. The Dragon Palace was as famous as the Xueqi Mountain Villa in Jianghu. Living in the north, it was convenient to enjoy the lake scenery. The secluded courtyard was even more elegant and clean, which made people's hearts beat faster. The walls were painted white and the tiles were blue. Painters were hired to make freehand paintings on the inner and outer walls of the house. While walking through the corridors, Lin Hongyuan also saw a small and humorous butterfly in love with a flower at the top of the corridor, which made her a little surprised. The floor of the main building was covered with transparent glass. Fishes in the lake could be seen faintly, either alone or in groups. Even though Su Fengnian was experienced and knowledgeable, he still admired the Xueqi Mountain Villa's value for money. Many noble families that rose and prospered after the spring and autumn period didn't lack money, but they didn't have such a foundation. Many of the buildings were pieced together, and experts could see the difference between noble families and aristocratic families at a glance. Lin Hongyuan, whose face was torn off, went to tidy herself up and put on a clean set of clothes. Su Fengnian, who was squatting on the glass floor and counting fishes, looked up and was stunned. It was a young woman with thick eyebrows and big eyes. She wasn't stunning, but because her eyebrows and eyes were rare, she was not easy to forget. Su Fengnian didn't have a good impression of the Dragon Palace. She was just a servant girl kept by the number 1 of the left of river, Nalin Yusi. This was also the reason why the 2 women dared to risk their lives on the 8-bar palanquin. After accidentally killing the heir of Beiliang, they had to act coquettishly to their master to take credit. Among the vassals of Liang, Zhao Bing, the king of Yanqi,
was the only one who caught Su Zhao's eye. Whether it was the cavalry or the infantry, their combat power was the closest to the northern Liang. Since ancient times, in Nanjiang, the land of barbarians, the number of academies was actually the first in the dynasty. Zhao Bing's reputation was much better than that of Zhao Yi, the king of Guangling. Even if the sky was high and the emperor was far away, there was no news of any overstepping of authority. The imperial court adopted Sun Ping's last words and spared no effort to remove the vassals, but there were very few restrictions on the king of Yanqi in the imperial court. Several major parties, including Zhang Gu, unanimously praised the government affairs of Nanjiang. This was probably all thanks to Nalin Yuxi's smoothness. Huang Sanjia once commented on all the strategists in the world, saying that Nalin Yuxi, a small country under the rule of Jiang Zhua, was well versed in the imperial court. Lin Hongyuan looked at the white-haired man who glanced at her and then lowered his head to tap on the glass again. If she could, she would not hesitate at all. She would chop off his limbs, cut off his eyeballs, make him deaf, and then force him to be mute. She would turn him into a human puppet and put him in a big vat, making him live a life worse than death for decades. But the problem was that Lin Hongyuan had no chance of winning at all. She was taught by her mother and had been scheming and vicious since she was a child. But there was one thing she learned from her good-for-nothing father. Su Fengnian suddenly said, "When you return to the Dragon Palace, either Nalin Yuxi will beat around the bush or the Prince of Yen will ask you about the details of our daily life. If you want to live a better life in the future, you should be more careful now." Lin Hongyuan moved a chair to sit on the edge of the glass floor. She raised her arm, put 2 fingers together, and slowly wiped her eyebrows. She smiled and said, "Young Master Su is really a good person who repays evil with good." Su Fengnian said calmly, "I know a little about Xianxia from the cottage. Li Yibai from the Dongyue sword pool and Li Huali from the Yanbao fort in Jizhou. I haven't heard much about these 2 young talents. Tell me more about them." Lin Hongyuan took off his boots and sat cross-legged on the chair. His hands massaged the soles of his feet casually. After thinking for a while he said carefully, "I know Li Yibai better. When he traveled thousands of miles with his sword, he came to the Dragon Palace. I also accompanied him to the south border, almost to the South Sea. His swordsmanship is superb. Because he came from the sword forest sacred ground, he naturally has a good understanding of swordsmanship. Time after time, he sharpens his swordsmanship and points to the key points. Gradually, he has the aura of an ancient sword fairy. If it weren't for his plain appearance, I might have fallen in love with him. However, Li Yibai has a weakness. He cultivates the out-of-the-world swordsmanship, but he cultivates the out-of-the-world swordsmanship. Because the Dongyue sword pool and the Dongyue royal family are attached to the imperial court, they urgently need someone to stand out and stabilize the marriage between the sword pool and Liang. This is a knot in Li Yibai's heart. When he returned from the Lingnan Mountains, Li Yibai happened to get a sword manual of the Great Qin dynasty. I wonder how he has been practicing it these years. Young Master Su, you should know that the martial artists in Jianghu are not only afraid of the people of the 3 sects monopolizing the time, but also afraid of the new swordsmen stepping on the shoulders of the seniors in swordsmanship. Young Master Su, even if you have a great divine ability and even a few Lin Hong apes are no match for you, that's only because Lin Hong apes happen to be subdued by one thing. Li Yibai is different. Don't be careless and become his sword test stone." Chapter 828. At this point, Lin Hongyuan deliberately paused. She thought that this guy would be arrogant and neglectful. Unexpectedly, he nodded and pursed his lips, indicating that he understood. Lin Hongyuan suppressed the gloom in her heart and continued, "As for Li Huali, Wild Goose Castle in Ji Province has never had any relationship with the Dragon Palace. I only know that the Han family in Ji Province was killed by the imperial court. Wild Goose Castle, as one of the important towns in Ji Province's border, was once a trusted subordinate of the Han family. Their owner, Li Jinjiang, was suspected of betrayal, so Wild Goose Castle's reputation has never been good in Jianghu. Li Huali, who gained a lot of military exploits at the border, did not have any bad deeds in Jianghu. He only joined the army at the age of 14 or 15, and last year when he was 20, he was able to become a commandant with real power to command 6,000 people. Even 10 surplus generals can't compare with him. Presumably, Li Huali has his own advantages." Lin Hongyuan seemed to be amused by herself. She smiled and said, praising Li Huali's shrewdness in front of young Master Su, "I really feel that I'm funny." Su Fengnian shook his head and said,
If you want to be successful at the border, even if you're a descendant of a general, it's not easy to come by. Compared to the narcissistic Li Yibai, I care more about Li Huili. Lin Hongyuan sighed in her heart. She was disgusted and even loathed such an opponent. The more Su Fengnian acted contrary to the rumors of a hedonistic son of rich parents, the more fearful she was. Lin Hongyuan's mystical secret arts were endless, and she was adept at scheming. Even if her opponent was a first-grade Vajra realm expert, she would still dare to fight him head-on. There were 4 first-grade Vajra realm, and the threshold was as high as the Dragon Gate. Apart from the people of the 3 religions, the Vajra realm was the limit. Most people could only dream of reaching the Xian finger realm. If a martial artist stepped into the celestial phenomenon realm step by step, he would dare to challenge the saints of the 3 religions. In layman's terms, he would be willing to sacrifice himself to drag the emperor down from his horse. Su Fengnian stood up and asked, "The Snow Villa will elect the Wulin Alliance chief the day after tomorrow. According to your estimation, how many people will come to join in the fun?" Lin Hongyuan blurted out without thinking, "There are at least 4,000 or 5,000 people, but the villa itself can only accommodate more than 200 people. Fortunately, there are many private villas, inns and taverns on the south side of the Spring God Lake, which can probably accommodate more than 1,000 people. The rest of the Wulin people have to live in the big and small towns 50 miles away, where good and bad people are mixed together. The only people who can really talk are the 200 or 300 guests who live in the Xueqi Snow Villa. The villa must be happy and painful. The happy part is that the Xueqi Snow Villa has never been the focus of the world. It welcomes guests from all over the world, which raises the status of the villa in Jianghu. The pain is that the 200 or 300 masters of various trades are not easy to serve. If something goes wrong, I'm afraid that a red light will turn into a white light. Whoever lives in a good yard, who lives in a bad yard, whose maids in the yard are more beautiful, will be personally received by the villa master. These people all have small calculations in their minds. It's easy to talk about the Dragon Palace who pays attention to them, but some of the gang leaders who are neither good nor bad, who don't have any big skills, but they pay attention to small schemes, which can be said to be endless. It's a test of the Xueqi Snow Villa's ability to receive people. Su Fengnian glanced at Lin Hongyuan, who was at her fingertips, and invisibly compared her with Ziyi of Mount Huishan. They were really different. He smiled warmly and said, "I didn't know that you know the ways of the world. Have you been managing the affairs of the Dragon Palace all these years?" Lin Hongyuan laughed at herself and said, "If it weren't for this delay and smiling apologetically every day, I would have been a real level 1 master." The door of the hall was opened. The bearded man Zhao Weiping stood at the door and knocked symbolically. Lin Hongyuan said indifferently, "Say it." The saber man who had worked for the Dragon Palace for many years said in a deep voice, "It is said that a little celestial master came to Dragon Tiger Mountain, who first went to stop the crazy monk of the western regions, Zhao Ningxian. The only son of the Prince of Qingqing, Wu Shizhen, also visited the Snow Villa with Qiu Mian." Su Fengnian was no stranger to Zhao Ningxian, who once blocked Dong Tai's sword on the mountain. Wu Shizhen was even more so. When he went to Qingyang Palace on horseback, he had dealt with the father and son. Wu Shizhen was beaten to a pulp. Wu Lingsu was nominally a prince of Liang with a different surname. The Prince of Qingqing, who only used some unorthodox methods to charm the emperors and ministers, was not worth mentioning compared to Su Shao, the vassal king. Moreover, the armored ant and thousands of soldiers in Mount Qingqing were the secret chess pieces of his master, Li Yishan. On the contrary, Su Fengnian had never heard of Qiu Mian. Lin Hongyuan waved her hand to signal Zhao Weiping to leave. She wiped the soles of her white socks and took the initiative to say, "Qiu Mian is a famous heroine in Jianghu in recent years. There are countless people under her skirt. She is beautiful. The clothes and jewelry she wears will quickly become popular in the north and south of the Yangtze River. Qiu Mian's reputation can be imagined. But this fairy swordsmanship attainment is not even worthy of carrying shoes for young Master Su." Su Fengnian laughed and said, "Whether or not her swordsmanship is worthy of carrying my shoes is another matter. Maybe I'm willing to bow down to her and line up with those Jianghu heroes to prostrate myself. Fairy Qiu wouldn't even be willing to look at me." Lin Hongyuan covered her mouth and smiled. Su Fengnian teased, "You just pinched the soles of your feet. Don't you think it is dirty?" After Lin Hongyuan smiled, her eyes curved into a pair of crescent moons. She stretched out her hand. "Smell it." Seeing that Su Fengnian was not amused, she stuck her finger into her mouth and licked it. Her gaze was provocative. Su Fengnian, who was still indifferent, smiled and said, "You want to compare your disgust with someone who often talks to a head full of lime? You are asking to be humiliated." Lin Hongyuan's eyes suddenly lit up. She straightened her waist, which was so thin that it could be grasped with one hand. She placed her hands on her legs and asked curiously, "I heard that you and Wudong's sect leader Hong Xixiang have known each other for many years. You even fought with Plum Wine, the invincible war saint? As long as you are willing, I will promise you anything. Even if I give my body to you, I will probably think that you are the one who lost out. In my life, I only admire these two strange men. If I were to live with one of them while the other forgot about Jianghu, even if I, Lin Hongyuan, became an immortal, I would not be willing." Su Fengnian dismissed it with a laugh and did not respond. But when they left the hall and arrived at the waterfront corridor, the fog on the lake became thicker and thicker. The world was a vast expanse of whiteness. Su Fengnian leaned on the railing. Lin Hongyuan hurriedly put on her shoes and followed behind him. She was still unwilling to give up. If outsiders saw this scene, they would most likely mistake them for a pair of Jianghu sons and daughters. Su Fengnian said softly, "Say, if we kill Xianxia, Li Yibai, and Li Huali in one go, wouldn't it be very interesting?" Lin Hongyuan's expression was complicated. She asked in a low voice, "Can we kill them?" Su Fengnian laughed. "We will know after we try." Chapter 829. The mist on the surface of the lake was steaming, making it look like a fairyland. At this moment, a melodious and clear sound came from the mist. Lin Hongyuan pricked up his ears to listen to the sound of the flute, dissipating the bloody smell brought by Su Fengnian's shocking words. Lin Hongyuan was intoxicated by the sound and simply closed his eyes. He seemed to be a famous flute player. He murmured, "The Deer Waste Ridge under Mount Hui's Unia Mound is surrounded by many purple bamboos. I don't know why there are green bamboos. There are moss clinging to the bamboo legs. The bamboo shoots are extremely bitter and can't be eaten. They are also called bitter bamboo, but they are most suitable to be used as flutes. I have never heard of this little song before. Listening to it, my ears are full of bitterness. I don't know how bitter the flute player's heart must be. Bitter green, bitter green, bitter green. It's talking about this person and this flute." Su Fengnian didn't have as many feelings as Lin Hongyuan. He spoiled the mood and said, "According to your flattery, if the flute player is handsome, just imagine him blowing across the river with a bitter face. Then he will be able to seduce a passing heroine. She will probably be unable to resist holding him in her arms and loving him tenderly." Sure enough, after Su Fengnian's remarks, Lin Hongyuan leaned back against the railing and stroked his forehead helplessly. Su Fengnian twirled a strand of hair around his temples and asked, "How many people in the world do you think can wipe out the Snow Mountain Villa in one breath?" Lin Hongyuan's eyebrows trembled. After thinking seriously, he said, "Wang Xianji, Tuoba, and Dong Tai. It can't be more than that." Mr. Nayland said that in the past 500 years, other than Wang Xianji who can compete with Ancestor Lu, no one else can achieve this feat. Beimang's god of war was close behind in the martial arts evaluation, but he surpassed the other 8 people by a large margin. Of course, to be precise, he was behind the peach blossom sword deity by 7 people. Even if other people became saints from the 3 sects, such as Chao Chongqing and the white-robed monk Li Xiaoxin, they would not be able to do it. This was because it went against their conscience. Once they entered sainthood, the heavenly phenomenon was too important. Once they went against the natural order, they would suffer a severe drop in their realm. For example, Li Dongxin had cut off the Yellow River and hung hundreds of feet of water on top of Taoism sect's head, so it would never fall on the innocent. Even if they were unwilling to surpass the North Sea, they could not do so. This was especially true for the reclusive masters of Buddhism. No one had ever heard of them appearing on the battlefield. The Taoist priests of Mount Longhu would only receive orders to open altars, set up rituals, and build auspicious Taoist temples to accumulate merits. How would they dare to kill the innocent? When it comes to Dong Tai, a carefree earth immortal, most of them will not lower themselves to the same level as ordinary people. Just like a strong man who sees a chicken pecking rice on the side of the road, he will not look for a stick to beat the chicken to death. If there is such a thing, it can only mean that there is something wrong with the guy's head. The crazy monk who sings wordless songs is one of them. Su Fengnian sighed softly. The sword is a good sword, but the person is not a good person. Lin Hongyuan was born with an exquisite heart.
He immediately understood the meaning and asked carefully, could it be that the monk was an extremely brilliant swordsman before he shaved his head?
Su Fengnian's elbow was on the railing while his other hand patted the railing lightly.
He smiled. I'll give you a word of advice.
I don't accept money. You are too smart and you will end up ruining your life.
Lin Hongyuan smiled. I've learned something.
But young master, you are being generous with other people's money. You have to know that I have also bought the first snow.
Speaking of which, the talented woman who said this seems to live on the spring deity lake.
If I am lucky enough not to die in your hands, I will definitely go and take a look at her face and ask her some questions that I have never been able to answer.
When the time comes and I appear in front of her, I will definitely pretend to be virtuous and virtuous, so as not to frighten the great master of the literary world that this little girl has admired for a long time.
Lin Hongyuan's words were lively, like a familiar and amiable girl next door. Unexpectedly, after Su Fengnian gently patted the railing, he suddenly slammed the railing heavily. Lin Hongyuan staggered and fell to the ground.
He covered his heart with both hands and his face was pale. He looked at the man who was talking and laughing just a moment ago with malice and anger in his eyes. Su Fengnian still rested his chin on his hand and looked down at the noble of the Dragon Palace, who seemed to have suffered an undeserved disaster.
He said, the flute player is Zhao Ningxian. The flute sound is transparent, which is only pleasing to the ears for laymen. But you and I both know that many listeners do not mean it, but the flute player means it. He uses the flute sound to distinguish the level of the people on the lake after touching the ripples of Qi everywhere. You pretended to flatter me just to let me release my Qi to listen to the flute sound. Even if my identity will not be exposed for the time being, it will make the young Taoist priest of the Dragon Tiger Mountain think about it. I kindly give you a maxim not to be a smart aleck. Lin Hongyuan, whose Qi was chaotic like boiling water, endured the piercing pain and asked bitterly, what kind of strange technique is this? You actually managed to take over my Qi by relying on a simple beat?
Su Fengnian smiled and said, there's no harm in telling you. I secretly learned from a blind female zither player in Beimang's 18 beats of the Hujia.
Originally, I did not know the technique and only knew the form.
Later, after a battle, I could be considered to have climbed to a higher position and looked further.
Coincidentally, you were not sensible, so I played with you.
Lin Hongyuan shouted crazily and sternly, Su Fengnian, what do you have to do with that human cat Han Diaoxi?
Previously, the finger mystery technique that tore my face and peeled the cocoon was Han Diaoxi's unique skill.
Now, the trick of seizing people's heart is clearly similar to Han Diaoxi's method of digging people's souls.
Su Fengnian ignored the extremely angry woman and turned his head to look at the white fog in the lake. He said to himself, that cat's head is really a good thing. It's much better than the head of the fifth raccoon. A wisp of vermilion jumped up and down in the mist. It was silent, joyful, and wanton. Su Fengnian, who had been holding his cheeks, had a warm look in his eyes. Lin Hongyuan looked up at this time and happened to stare at his pair of red phoenix eyes. She was in a daze. How could one have both the handsome horse and the autumn wind in the north and the apricot flowers and misty rain in the south? How could this devil, who made her afraid, have such a warm side? Lin Hongyuan did not know what he saw or what he thought. At that moment, she only felt that if she could make him into a human puppet in this life, she must keep his eyes. Su Fengnian stood up and stretched his neck lazily. He bent down and looked into Lin Hongyuan's eyes. There are several kinds of pseudo-Xian finger skills in the Dragon Palace. I taught you one, so you have to teach me one. Lin Hongyuan felt anxious and miserable. She thought, then why don't you stand still and let me torment you until your ocean of qi is boiling? Let me beat you until you are half dead. She could only purse her lips tightly. Su Fengnian touched Lin Hongyuan's eyebrows with his fingertips. He did not have the posture of bargaining at all. He smiled and said, I have seen a lot of finger mystery techniques, but the more this thing the better. You, Lin Hongyuan, will be the woman of the master of the Dragon Palace in the future. You have a bright future. If you die in the Snow Mountain Villa for no reason, what else can you do except as a secret joke? I don't have a big appetite. I'm not asking you to say all of them. As long as there is one, we are even. How about it? Next, you have to complete the task given to you by Mr. Naylan. I will kill my people. Lin Hongyuan sneered and said, You can't kill me because you want this? Su Fengnian did not have the time to be gentle with her.
With a light tap of his finger, Lin Hongyuan, who had been heavily hit between the eyebrows, crashed through the railing and fell into the lake. Then, she seemed to be kicked back to the outer corridor by a water ghost, becoming a drowned rat in the middle of winter. Su Fengnian squatted beside her and crossed his arms. Lin Hongyuan vomited a mouthful of blood. Apparently, she was not as energetic as before. She said dejectedly, "If you go back on your words and know what you want to know, you will still kill me in the end." "So what?" Su Fengnian's eyes were clear. He shook his head and said, "You can rest assured. I have a message for you to tell your benefactor, Mr. Naylan. Whether it's Zhao Weiping or that sneaky Yang Mao Yang, none of them are qualified." Lin Hongyuan steadied her breath and sneered. "To understand the mystery of finger mystery, is it as easy as reciting a few lines of poetry?" "Young Master Su, could it be that you're a rare genius like Wang Xianji?" Su Fengnian held his belly and laughed. Lin Hongyuan was confused. Su Fengnian pointed at Lin Hongyuan and said shamelessly, "I thought I was already a jinx. I didn't expect you to be better than me." "You are right." Lin Hongyuan lamented. He really wanted to break this bastard's 3 legs with one punch. Su Fengnian restrained his smile and said, "Seriously, you should first talk about the meaning of the mysterious finger skill hidden in the Dragon Palace. If it's not useful to just talk about it, I don't mind being your practice body. You can wait for a chance to take revenge openly." Lin Hongyuan hesitated for a moment, and it was obvious that he was struggling with himself. Su Fengnian mocked, "Lin Hongyuan, do you know that it's because you know too much about mechanism algebra that it's easy for you to be blinded by a single leaf? Women don't have courage and only know how to play petty tricks. They can't achieve great things. Extreme wisdom is bound to be hurt. This wisdom is small wisdom and not the wisdom of the root. Truly smart people will pretend to be stupid and be willing to suffer losses. If it was that woman from Mount Hui, she would have already done business with me based on her intuition. She is the one with the root of wisdom. You're too petty." "I always think that a woman's intuition is very similar to the foresight of the root of finger mystery." Lin Hongyuan didn't disappoint Su Fengnian. She went straight to the point and asked indifferently, "Have you ever personally copied the tablet?" Su Fengnian shook his head. Lin Hongyuan frowned. After her eyebrows relaxed, she said, "The Dragon Palace saved a Taoist great spiritual master 300 years ago and passed on a unique mystery finger mystery to that generation's patriarch. It was similar to a copy." Su Fengnian was originally concentrating. Suddenly he smiled and said, "Change your clothes first." Lin Hongyuan didn't refuse. She stood up and changed her clothes. A woman's love for beauty had nothing to do with martial strength. The Dragon Palace amassed countless wealth. If she wanted jewelry, Lin Hongyuan could wear it so that people would only see the jewelry and not her. The Dragon Palace also hid a few sets of the phoenix coronet and robe that the Empress of Southern Tang didn't have time to take from the weaving bureau. Lin Hongyuan had just changed into a relatively simple and elegant dress when the curly-bearded swordsman Zhao Weiping respectfully reported at the door, "Master Xueqi is here." Chapter 830. Lin Hongyuan did not go out immediately. Instead, she went to inform Su Fengnian. He asked Lin Hongyuan to do her business first while he leaned on the railing of the corridor outside the inner hall. Yuqi Liangfu, the owner of the Quick Snow Mountain Villa, was as busy as a bamboo dragonfly. The sudden arrival of Zhao Ningxian from the Taoist master residence of Dragon Tiger Mountain brought light to the villa. Even Wu Shizhen from the Qingyang Palace and Qiu Mian from the Butterfly Sword Sect became the icing on the cake. It did not mean that Zhao Ningxian, who was famous in the Liang Palace, was more important than Xianxia from the cottage. It was just that the latter was expected, so it was not as surprising as the former. Yuqi Liangfu had personally met more than 30 martial arts giants in the past 2 days. Most of them were in their prime, and there were also many old people. Among the younger generation, Li Yibai from the Dongyue sword pool was like a blunt sword that had not been sharpened yet. He was very easy to get along with. Li Huali from the Yanbao castle was so arrogant that he did not even take the owner of the villa seriously. Only the young Taoist master Zhao Ningxian, who was wearing a Taoist robe from Dragon Tiger Mountain, hemp shoes, and a bamboo flute around his waist, always stared at the eyes of others when he talked with them. He was so focused that others felt that he was chatting with them. It was not a boring greeting at all, but more like a reunion after a long separation. This young Taoist with warm and sincere eyes made people respect him. Yuqi Liangfu's self-esteem had been hurt a bit by that young man Li Huali, and it happened to be compensated by Zhao Ningxian. Comparing the goods to the goods, the manor lord, who was in the prime of his life, had a better impression of Zhao Ningxian. After he personally brought Zhao Ningxian to his residence, they talked so happily that he almost did not want to leave the house. If it was not for the chief steward who kept winking and reminding him that the great Bodhisattva from the Dragon Palace was still standing in the small courtyard by the lake, Yuqi Liangfu really wanted to have a long talk with Zhao Ningxian. When it came to cultivation, Zhao Ningxian's every word was like a gem. Yuqi Liangfu decided to take this opportunity to be on good terms with Dragon Tiger Mountain. There were a few precious Taoist scriptures in the library of the villa that were beneficial to him. Because the person who came from the Dragon Palace to visit the Quick Snow Villa was only an imperial censor, who was not a top-notch figure in the strict hierarchy of the Dragon Palace, Yuqi Liangfu was not willing to open the E-gate to welcome him. However, he could deliberately neglect the imperial censor, but he could not really ignore the Dragon Palace. The matter of face was mutual. The imperial censor did not make an excessive request to open the E-gate, which was giving face to the Quick Snow Villa. Yuqi Liangfu hurriedly came in person, which was giving face to the Dragon Palace. Yuqi Liangfu waited for a moment in the courtyard and saw a young woman with average looks cross the threshold. She greeted him with a smile. Lin Hongyuan from the Dragon Palace greets Master Yuqi. Yuqi Liangfu, who heard that the imperial censor came to the villa, was stunned for a moment. He quickly came back to his senses and stepped forward. His smile was even wider. He cupped his fists and said, "I did not expect young Palace Mistress Lin to come in person. The Quick Snow Villa is guilty of not welcoming you." Lin Hongyuan walked down the steps and stepped on the steps with Yuqi Liangfu. She said softly, "Niece knows that Uncle Yuqi must be very busy today, so I acted on my own initiative and did not tell the truth, so as to avoid Uncle Yuqi making unnecessary moves for niece's sake." Yuqi Liangfu's heart was very warm when he heard his niece's words. Not to mention that when the two crossed the threshold, young Palace Mistress Lin intentionally or unintentionally lagged behind by half a step. The host and guest were clearly distinguished. Yuqi Liangfu, who was dressed simply, laughed heartily and said, "If everyone was like you, Uncle would be relaxed. Unlike now, I wish I could break into two halves and use them. Take the Quadun Mountain, which claims to be the #1 sect in the southern wilderness, for example, a young man with the surname Xueqi. Uncle has never heard of him. Not only does he want the villa to open the E-gate for him, but he also has to vacate the villa's Spring God restaurant for him. How ridiculous! To let such an ignorant child participate in this once-in-a-century grand event on behalf of the sect. Quadun Mountain has really entrusted the wrong person." Lin Hongyuan smiled but did not speak. Quadun Mountain was indeed a well-deserved sect in Lingnan. Moreover, it had been fighting openly and secretly with the Dragon Palace for a full 200 years. Quadun Mountain occupied an ancient temple on the border of the southern Tang Empire's Lin Hai. When the southern Tang Emperor ascended the throne to pray for rain, stop plague, and even ask for heirs and other important matters of state, he would send important ministers or local dignitaries to worship the sea god in the temple. Every time, he would set up a monument to record the event. So far, there were 29 Tang monuments. After Liang unified the spring and autumn period, because Beiliang dominated the northwest gateway, there were only two options for demoted officials. The officials were either sent to Liao and Lingnan, with the latter being the majority. The imperial court obviously trusted the Prince of Yan, Zhao Bing, more than the Prince of Jiaodong, Zhao Sui. Most of these demoted officials were from the local area. Quadun Mountain's literary atmosphere was quite strong. The two often sang poems together, adding a lot of luster to Quadun Mountain. If the Dragon Palace was Nailan Yusi's concubine maid, then Quadun Mountain was Nailan Yusi's fisherman. The two were just jealous of each other these years. Yuqi Liangfu's posture was nothing more than a common technique of suppressing and raising one's hand. However, he was adept in the ways of the world. In the end, he still needed to let others know that it was not too straightforward. Otherwise, if he blindly kept it hidden, others would not know whether he was good or bad. What would that be? Lin Hongyuan did not agree. She deliberately stepped on Quadun Mountain a few times. This would only make Yuqi Liangfu, the old fox, look down on the Dragon Palace behind her. The two sat on the yellow rosewood armchair. Yuqi Liangfu put his hands on the smooth armrest, while Lin Hongyuan sat upright and still. Her back did not touch the back of the chair at all, showing the etiquette of a junior. In the eyes of Yuqi Liangfu, the middle-aged man who sat on the first armchair in the Quick Snow Mountain Villa quietly withdrew his hands from the armrest and asked gently, "Niece, are you used to living here?"
The spring god lake is not like the dragon palace. In winter, it is always cold to the bone. Now it is snowing heavily. In the villa, there is an elegant and quiet courtyard paved with earth dragons. It is my daughter's boudoir. If you don't mind, you can move there to rest. Uncle's daughter has been fascinated by the dragon palace for a long time. She always complains to me that she was born in the wrong body. She should be a fairy in the dragon palace. Lin Hongyuan smiled and said, "If Sister Yuqi goes to the dragon palace, I will definitely give way."
Yuqi Liangfu laughed and waved his hand. Her half-baked swordsmanship is just a frog at the bottom of the well.
I hope she can quickly find a good family to marry.
Lin Hongyuan's eyes narrowed into crescents. Sister Yuqi will not worry about marriage? In my opinion, she will definitely bring home a son-in-law of level 1 realm for uncle in the future.
Yuqi Liangfu chuckled and said, "Thank you for your auspicious words." Immediately, a melancholy expression appeared on the Quick Snow Mountain Villa's master's face. This damned girl. Uncle gets a headache every time she talks about it.
I don't know where she heard some absurd rumors, but she is dead set on that Baelyang heir whom she has never met before. She says that he is the most heroic man in the world. When she talks about His Royal Highness, she is so familiar with it that it is as if she is possessed.
Half of Uncle's white hair is because of her. Niece, in Uncle's opinion, although your sister Yuchuan is older than you by a few years, she is still thousands of miles away from you. Uncle still wants you to move there and persuade her on Uncle's behalf. When I try to reason with her, it goes in one ear and out the other. It is useless. If you talk to her, she will definitely be willing to listen. If she can really come out of a dead end, Uncle will personally take her to the Dragon Palace to visit and thank them in person. Lin Hongyuan's eyes flashed with an undetectable oddness, but he quickly said, "Then I'll stay at Big Sister Yuchi's place alone. As long as Big Sister Yuchi doesn't drive me away, I'll shamelessly stay here. Uncle will casually arrange a remote courtyard for these servants. Uncle, you don't have to be polite to your niece." Yuqi Liangfu laughed happily and said loudly, "It is hard to say about others, but there is absolutely no reason for you to feel wronged. You can continue to live in this courtyard without worry. Although the Quick Snow Mountain Villa is not comparable to the Dragon Palace, it is not so shabby that a courtyard is not presentable. Uncle will leave the words here today. In the future, this courtyard will be left to you. You can come and play at any time. When you are not living here, you are not allowed to enter the courtyard except for letting the maids clean it diligently. Come, 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 Uncle will take you to your sister Yuchi." Lin Hongyuan stood up and shook her head. "Uncle, you go ahead with your work. I still have some scattered things to pack. I will ask the way to Sister Yuchi and leisurely enjoy the scenery along the way." Yuqi Liangfu stood up and thought for a moment before nodding. "That is also fine. I will first send someone to inform that girl. Uncle is sure that you two will hit it off at first sight." Lin Hongyuan jokingly said, "Uncle, you should hurry up with your work. Your niece still has to worry about how to give Sister Yuchi a meeting gift that will not be degrading."
Yuqi Liangfu politely said a few words, his face full of undisguised pleasure. He quickly walked out of the courtyard with the chief steward who had been silent all this time. After walking for more than 100 feet, Yuqi Liangfu looked back at the courtyard and sighed. If Yuchuan had half of Lin Hongyuan's shrewdness, I, as her father, would not have to worry. The old steward, who was close to 70 years old, softly comforted. "Manor Lord, eldest Miss Pure Heart is precious. As the old saying goes, those who cherish fortune will have it." Yuqi Liangfu laughed and scolded. "What ancient saying? Most likely, it was made up by you again. That girl Yuchuan was right. We should publish a cautionary tale for you. It won't be much worse than the first snow." The old steward looked as if he had drunk a pot of wine. He stroked his beard and smiled. "You must understand and not deceive yourself. Manor Lord, I am just a half-baked person. Don't make a fool of yourself." Yuqi Liangfu stretched out his hand and pointed at the old steward. You. Chapter 831. The two rushed to the next courtyard, where lived a sect that was one of the top 3 in Jianghu when it came to poisons. It didn't matter if they were friends or not, but they definitely couldn't be enemies. Yuqi Liangfu had to brace himself to deal with them. He heard that the eccentric old man liked men. For this reason, the Quick Snow Manor hired 2 handsome young men from a brothel in Xiangfan City to live in the courtyard. They were discreetly hidden among the maids, just in case. Yuqi Liangfu was deeply moved as he walked. This time, in order to win the election of the Wulin Alliance leader, Xueqi had paid a great price not only in the Spring Invitation Cottage but also in the Dongyue sword pool. Just the unremarkable ingredients alone cost more than 3,000 taels of silver a day, not to mention the extravagant expenses of renting expensive young men from the brothel. In the courtyard, Lin Hongyuan walked to the outer corridor and saw Su Fengnian sitting against the wall outside, fiddling with something with his head lowered. She smiled and said, "Have you heard? That Miss Yuqi is very stubborn about you, young master." Su Fengnian raised his head, revealing an unfamiliar face. He wore a root-shaped face that hadn't been used much since his Beimang returned. He smiled and said, "This Miss Yuqi's taste is very good, unparalleled in the world." The corner of Lin Hongyuan's mouth twitched. Su Fengnian stood up and smiled. "Go get me an ordinary mink hat. Let's make another bet." Lin Hongyuan asked, "What bet?" Su Fengnian crossed his fingers and stretched them to the top of his head. He lazily shook his head. "Let's bet on whether or not I can kill Xianxia tonight. If I can kill her, you'll have to say another type of finger art outside of steel rubbing. If you can't kill her and get killed instead, you have no loss." Lin Hongyuan sneered. "You don't get up early if there are no benefits. What does it have to do with me whether you kill Xianxia or not?" Su Fengnian smiled and looked at Lin Hongyuan. The latter giggled. "If you can kill Xianxia, Li Huili, and Li Yibai in succession, I'll bet with you." Su Fengnian clicked his tongue. "You finally learned to be smart. But first, I won't kill Li Yibai. Do you have any enemies? Let's exchange." Lin Hongyuan said without hesitation. "No problem. Let's kill Choduan Mountain's Yushi man. I can give you the mink hat and the courtyard where they live in the Quick Snow Mountain villa before nightfall." Su Fengnian glanced at Lin Hongyuan, who spoke in a straightforward manner, and clicked his tongue in wonder. "You've hidden your strength well. You've been plotting against that Yushi for a long time. This time, not only did you, the young palace master, hide your head and show your tail, but you also brought along Yang Maoyang, who did not hesitate to sneak into the team carrying the palanquin. Just to target Quadan Mountain? If you use me to kill someone, your hands won't be stained with blood. When the time comes, Yuqi Nyochuan will testify for you, and the Dragon Palace will be cleared of any wrongdoing." Lin Hongyuan smiled foolishly and didn't speak. Su Fengnian looked at the mist in the distance of the Spring God Lake. Lin Hongyuan's eyesight was good. He followed the line of sight and didn't see anything. A moment later, a woman's voice was heard. "Is the southern border Dragon Palace living here? Answer me. If not, I won't go ashore." Lin Hongyuan came near the railing and saw a young woman with a pretty face and a particularly enchanting figure pulling a boat over alone. She was wearing a high-quality fox fur coat, but it was inevitably a little gray and old because of the years. Lin Hongyuan was surprised that such a woman appeared in such a new way. He asked calmly, "Are you Yu Quan?" The woman nodded. "Then you are." Lin Hongyuan sensed that Su Fengnian had long disappeared, so he had a deeper understanding of him. Facing the eldest miss of Quick Snow Manor, Yuqi Nyochuan, he smiled and said, "I am Lin Hongyuan of Dragon Palace. Greetings to Sister Yuqi." Yuqi Yu Quan put down her bamboo pole and quickly jumped onto the outer corridor. "Are you Fairy Lin, the young palace master?" Normally, Lin Hongyuan wouldn't care. But after hearing about the young devil's harsh sarcasm towards the heroines of Jianghu, he felt slightly uncomfortable. Yuqi Yu Quan didn't care about their first meeting. She warmly grabbed Lin Hongyuan's hands and asked with a face full of surprise, "Fairy Lin, is your dragon palace really built at the bottom of the sea like the rumors say?" Lin Hongyuan thought to himself, being admired by such a silly girl doesn't seem to be something to be proud of. Yuqi Yu Quan's face suddenly turned cold. She said fiercely, "What are you hiding for? A big man, come out." Hey, the one in the room, I'm talking about you. You were in the outer corridor just now, but now you're less than 30 feet away from me. Don't think that I don't know where you are just because you're behind a wall." Lin Hongyuan was shocked to the extreme. Could it be that this girl was the same kind of ruthless person as the one surnamed Su, and both liked to play the fool? Inside the room, Su Fengnian was also quite shocked. After hesitating for a moment, he calmly walked out of the room. Lin Hongyuan, who was standing side by side with Yuqi Yu Quan, quietly raised his hand and made a swift and fierce gesture, silently asking Su Fengnian if he should kill this hidden danger.
Su Fengnian turned a blind eye to it.
He was in the middle of preparing his words.
But he didn't expect that the girl would stare at Su Fengnian's white hair. Then, with a jump, she rushed in front of Su Fengnian. Almost nose to nose, she said in a shocking tone, "Haha, I knew it was you, Su Fengnian Bailiang." Su Fengnian didn't wait for her to say the words His Royal Highness. He directly knocked out this girl with a karate chop. He thought that there would be more twists and turns, but he didn't expect that this karate chop, which was more probing than murderous, would go so smoothly. She rolled her eyes without any resistance, and then her delicate body fell limply into his arms. That's it? Lin Hongyuan really couldn't stand this kind of boring turn of events. He originally thought that this Yuchi sister and the one surnamed Su would have a good show of a snipe and a clam fighting for several hundred rounds until the sky turned dark. It would be good if they fought from the outer corridor to the surface of the lake. Lin Hongyuan was glanced at by Su Fengnian and felt somewhat guilty. He asked in a small voice, "Then should I still go to Yuchi Yuquan's house? If I can't find her at the Snow Mountain Villa, it won't be easy to wrap things up." Su Fengnian said without hesitation, "Drink. Go find a jug. First, fill your mouth with the smell of alcohol, pretend to be drunk, and then pour a few mouthfuls into her mouth. If anyone asks on the way, just say that you regret not having met earlier, and help her back to the house. The 2 matters of the mink hat and the 3 people's residence, do as instructed. 1 night is enough." Lin Hongyuan was silent. Su Fengnian, who was still holding Yuchi Yuquan, frowned and said, "Are you deaf?" Lin Hongyuan sighed. "No wonder Mr. Naylan praised you so much in private." Su Fengnian carried Yuchi Yuquan on his shoulder, turned around and walked back into the house. He sneered. "Do you think that was a compliment? A truly intelligent person won't be valued by the opponent before they exchange blows." Lin Hongyuan followed behind him, laughing to himself. If there was still a chance to make him into a puppet, he wouldn't have given him a mute drug. After all, listening to him speak, whether it was reasonable or not, was quite interesting and could relieve boredom. Su Fengnian casually threw the fainted Yuchi Yuquan on the armchair and began to close his eyes to concentrate. In less than an hour, dusk was approaching. Zhao Weiping walked into the house and handed Lin Hongyuan a mink hat and a handkerchief. Lin Hongyuan spread it out and carefully looked at it, then hid it in his sleeve. He walked to the corner of the hall and took out a wintersuite that needed to be changed every day from a vase. It was waxy yellow in color and had been broken off not long ago. It was still tender and beautiful, with some moisture. Lin Hongyuan carried the wintersuite branch and squatted at Su Fengnian's feet. While describing the terrain of the Quick Snow Mountain Villa, he divided the ground vertically and horizontally. Spring Invitation Cottages Xianxia and Yanbao's Lihuoli's courtyard were not too far apart because of their status. The key point was that their backing was on the same level, so they were relatively close to each other. Only Yu Shiman's courtyard was separated by half a li in a straight line. Including the detours, it was estimated to be 1 li. Don't look at the difference of half a li. It might contain huge variables. While pointing the way, Lin Hongyuan did not speak much nonsense. He knew that this demon was not stupid enough to fly over the eaves of the Quick Snow Mountain Villa. Su Fengnian, who was spinning the mink hat with his fingers, closed his eyes and reviewed the plan. After opening his eyes, he nodded and said, "It's done." Lin Hongyuan nervously asked, "Can you tell me the general plan?" Su Fengnian calmly said, "Just do it as simple as you can." Even if he said it, it would be useless. Lin Hongyuan really did not have the courage to get to the bottom of it. Yuchi Nyochuan let out a series of small and broken groans of pain. In the ears of an old hand in flowers, it might have a special charm. Su Fengnian originally wanted to knock her out with a finger and let her sleep until dawn. After thinking about it, he gave up and gently patted her face. Yuchi Nyochuan seemed to have used up a lot of strength to open her eyes. Her face was blank and absent-minded. Su Fengnian and her sat in an armchair facing each other. He calmly said, "You will answer whatever I ask." She unconsciously nodded her head. Su Fengnian asked, "How did you know of my existence?" Yuchi Nyochuan finally came back to her senses a little, but she still felt that her entire body lacked strength. She wanted to speak to him a little louder, but she did not have the strength. She wrinkled her nose and said with hidden bitterness in her eyes, "I smelled it. My nose has been very sensitive since I was young. When I was young, my mother often laughed at me for being like a puppy. Why did you hit me the moment you saw me? even if you are Su. Su Fengnian's expression was cold as he directly flicked his finger on her forehead. The pain caused her entire body to emit cold air. She did her best to wrap her arms around her shoulders, on the verge of tears. Su Fengnian stared at her limpid eyes and continued to ask, "Why are you so sure that I am Su Fengnian?"